consciousness into groups, and according to their similitude tend to associate, to sum up, to be opposed. The sensations which are usually felt in close connection with one another will arise in memory in the same connection. Gradually, out of the memories of sensations, perceptions are compounded. Perceptions, these are so to speak the group memories of sensations. During the compounding of perceptions, sensations are polarizing in two clearly defined directions. The first direction of this grouping will be according to the character of sensations. The sensations of a yellow color will combine with the sensations of a yellow color, sensations of a sour taste with those of a sour taste. The second direction will be according to the time of the reception of sensations. When various sensations, constituting a single group, and compounding one perception, enter simultaneously, then the memory of this definite group of sensations is ascribed to a common cause. This common cause is projected into the outside world as the object, and it is assumed that the given perception itself reflects the real properties of this object. Such group remembrance constitutes perception, the perception, for example, of a tree, that tree. Into this group enter the green color of the leaves, their smell, their shadows, their rustle in the wind, etc. All these things taken together form as it were a focus of rays coming out of the psyche, gradually concentrated upon the outside object and coinciding with it either well or ill. In the further complication of the psychic life, the memories of perception proceed as with the memories of sensations. Mingling together, the memories of perceptions, or the images of perceptions, combine in various ways, they sum up, they stand opposed, they form groups, and in the end give rise to concepts. Thus out of various sensations, experienced, in groups, at different times, a child gets the perception of a tree, that tree, and afterwards, out of the images of perceptions of different trees there emerges the concept of a tree, i.e. not that tree, but trees in general. The formation of perceptions leads to the formation of words, and the appearance of speech. The beginning of speech may appear on the lowest level of psychic life, during the period of living by sensations, and it will become more complex during the period of living by perceptions. But unless there be concepts it will not be speech in the true meaning of the word. On the lower levels of psychic life certain sensations can be expressed by certain sounds. Therefore it is possible to express common impressions of horror, anger, pleasure. These sounds may serve as signals of danger, as commands, demands, threats, etc., but it is impossible to say much by means of them. In the further development of speech, if words or sounds express perceptions, as in the case of children, this means that the given sound or the given word designates only that object to which it refers. For each new similar object must exist another new sound, or a new word. If the speaker designates different objects by one and the same sound or word, it means that in his opinion the objects are the same, or that knowingly he is calling different objects by the same name. In either case it will be difficult to understand him, and such speech cannot serve as an example of clear speech. For instance, if a child call a tree by a certain sound or word, having in view that tree only, and not knowing other trees at all, then any new tree which he may see he will call by a new word, or else he will take it for the same tree. The speech in which words correspond to perceptions is as it were made up of proper nouns. There are no appellative nouns. And not only substantives, but verbs, adjectives and adverbs have the character of proper nouns, that is, they apply to a given action, to a given quality, or to a given property. The appearance of words of a common meaning in human speech signifies the appearance of concepts in consciousness. Speech consists of words, each word expressing a concept. Concept and word are in substance one and the same thing. Only the first, the concept, represents, so to speak, the inner side, and the second, the word, the outer side. Or, as says Dr. R. M. Buck, the author of the book Cosmic Consciousness, about which I shall have much to say later on, a word, i.e. concept, is the algebraical sign of a thing. It has been noticed thousands of times that the brain of a thinking man does not exceed in size the brain of a non-thinking wild man in anything like the proportion in which the mind of the thinker exceeds the mind of the savage. The reason is that the brain of a Herbert Spencer has very little more work to do than has the brain of a native Australian, for this reason, that Spencer does all his characteristic mental work by signs or counters which stand for concepts, while the savage does all or nearly all his by means of cumbersome recepts. The savage is in a position comparable to that of the astronomer who makes his calculations by arithmetic, while Spencer is in the position of one who makes them by algebra. The first will fill many great sheets of paper with figures and go through immense labor, the other will make the same calculations on an envelope and with comparatively little mental work. 9. In our speech, words express concepts or ideas. By ideas are meant broader concepts, not representing the group sign of similar perceptions, but embracing various groups of perceptions, or even groups of concepts. Therefore an idea is a complex or an abstract concept. In addition to the simple sensations of these sense organs, color, sound, touch, smell and taste, in addition to the simple emotions of pleasure, pain, joy, anger, surprise, wonder, curiosity and many others, there is passing through our consciousness a series of complex sensations and higher, complex, emotions, moral, aesthetic, religious. The content of emotional feelings, even the simplest, to say nothing of the complex, can never be wholly confined to concepts or ideas, and therefore can never be correctly or exactly expressed in words. Words can only allude to it, point to it. The interpretation of emotional feelings and emotional understanding is the problem of art. In combinations of words, in their meaning, their rhythm, their music, the combination of meaning, rhythm and music. In sounds, colors, lines, forms, men are creating a new world, and are attempting therein to express and transmit that which they feel, but which they are unable to express and transmit simply in words, i.e., in concepts. The emotional tones of life, i.e., of feelings, are best transmitted by music, but it cannot express concepts, i.e., thought. Poetry endeavors to express both music and thought together. The combination of feeling and thought of high tension leads to a higher form of psychic life. Thus in art we have already the first experiments in a language of the future. Art anticipates a psychic evolution and divines its future forms. At the present time an average man, taken as a norm, has attained to 3 units of psychic life: sensation, perception, and conception. Furthermore, observation reveals the fact that some people at certain times acquire a new, 4th unit of psychic life, which different authors and different schools name differently, but in which an element of knowledge or ideas is always united with an emotional element. If Kant's ideas are correct, if space with its characteristics is a property of our consciousness, and not of the external world, then the three-dimensionality of the world must in this or some other manner depend upon the constitution of our psychic apparatus. It is possible to put the question concretely in the following manner: what bearing upon the three-dimensional extension of the world has the fact that in our psychical apparatus we discover the categories above described, sensations, perceptions and concepts? We possess such a psychical apparatus and the world is three-dimensional. How is it possible to establish the fact that the three-dimensionality of the world depends upon such a constitution of our psychical apparatus? This could be proven or disproven undeniably only with the aid of experiments. If we could change our psychic apparatus and should then discover that the world around us was changing, this would constitute for us the proof of the dependence of the properties of space upon the properties of our consciousness. For example, if we could make the above-mentioned higher form of psychic life, which appears now accidentally as it were and depends upon insufficiently studied conditions, just as definite, exact, and subject to our will as is the concept. And if the number of characteristics of space increased, i.e., if space became four-dimensional instead of being three-dimensional, this would affirm our presupposition, and would prove Kant's contention that space with its properties is a form of our sensuous receptivity. Or if we could diminish the number of units of our psychic life, and deprive ourselves or someone else of conceptions, leaving the psyche to act by perceptions and sensations only, And if by so doing the number of characteristics of the space surrounding us diminished, i.e., if for the person subjected to the test the world became two-dimensional instead of three-dimensional, and indeed one-dimensional as a result of a still greater limitation of the psychic apparatus. By depriving the person of perceptions, this would affirm our presupposition, and Kant's idea could be considered proven. That is to say, Kant's idea would be proven experimentally if we could be convinced that for the being possessing sensations only, the world is one-dimensional, for the being possessing sensations and perceptions the world is two-dimensional. And for the being possessing, in addition to concepts and ideas, the higher forms of knowledge the world is four-dimensional. Or, more exactly, Kant's thesis in regard to the subjectivity of space perception could be regarded as proven, a. If for the being possessing sensations only, our entire world with all its variety of forms should seem a single line. If the universe of this being should possess but one dimension, i.e., should this being be one-dimensional in the properties of its receptivity. And, b. If for the being possessing, in addition to the faculty of feeling sensations, the faculty of forming perceptions, the world should have a two-dimensional extension. If all our world with its blue sky, clouds, green trees, mountains and precipices, should seem to him one plane, if the universe of this being should have only two dimensions, i.e., if this being were two-dimensional in the properties of its receptivity. More briefly, Kant's thesis would be proven could we be made to see that for the conscious being the number of characteristics of the world changes in accordance with the changes of its psychic apparatus. To perform such an experiment, affecting the diminution of psychic characteristics is not possible under ordinary conditions. We cannot arbitrarily limit our own, or anyone else's psychic apparatus. Experiments with the augmentation of psychic characteristics have been made and are recorded, but in consequence of many diverse causes they are insufficiently convincing. The chief reason for this is that the augmentation of psychic faculties yields, first of all, so much of newness in the psychic realm that this newness obscures the changes proceeding simultaneously in the previous perception of the world. One feels the new, but is not capable of defining the difference exactly. The entire body of teachings of religio-philosophic movements have as their avowed or hidden purpose, the expansion of consciousness. This also is the aim of mysticism of every age and of every faith, the aim of occultism, and of the Oriental Yoga. But the question of the expansion of consciousness demands special study. The final chapters of this book will be dedicated to it. For the present, in proof of the above stated propositions with regard to the change of the world in relation to psychic changes, it is sufficient to consider the assumption concerning the possibility of a smaller number of psychic characteristics. If experiments in this direction are impossible, perhaps observation may furnish what we seek. Let us put the question: are there not beings in the world standing toward us in the necessary relation, whose psyche is of a lower grade than ours? Such psychically inferior beings undoubtedly exist. These are animals. Of the difference between the psychical nature of an animal and of a man we know very little. The usual, conversational, psychology deals with it not at all. Usually we deny altogether that animals have minds, or else we ascribe to them our own psychology, but, limited, though how and in what we do not know. Again, we say that animals do not possess reason, but are governed by instinct. As to what exactly we mean by instinct we do not ourselves know. I am speaking not alone of popular, but so-called scientific psychology. Let us try to discover what instinct is, and learn something about animal psychology. First of all, let us analyze the actions of animals, and see wherein they differ from ours. If these actions are instinctive, what inference is to be drawn from the fact? What are those actions in general, and how do they differ? In the actions of living beings within the limits of our usual observation we discriminate between those which are reflex, instinctive, rational and automatic. Reflex actions are simply responses by motion, reactions upon external irritations, taking place always in the same way, regardless of their utility or futility, expediency or inexpediency in any given case. Their origin and laws are due to the simple irritability of a cell. What is the irritability of a cell, and what are these laws? The irritability of a cell is defined as its faculty to respond to external irritation by emotion. Experiments with the simplest monocellular organisms have shown that this irritability acts according to definite laws. The cell responds by emotion to outside irritation. The force of the responsive motion increases as the force of the irritation is intensified, but in no definite proportionality. In order to provoke the responsive movement, the irritation must be of a sufficient intensity. Each experienced irritation leaves a certain trace in the cell, making it more receptive to the new irritations. In this we see that the cell responds to the repetitive irritation of an equal force by a more forceful motion than the first one. And if the irritations be repeated further, the cell will respond to them by more and more forceful motions, up to a certain limit. Having reached this limit, the cell experiences fatigue, and responds to the same irritation by more and more feeble reactions. It is as if the cell becomes accustomed to the irritation. It becomes for the cell part of a constant environment, and it ceases to react, because it is reacting generally only to changes in conditions which are constant. If from the very beginning the irritation is so weak that it fails to provoke the responsive motion, it nevertheless leaves in the cell a certain invisible trace. This can be inferred from the fact that by repeating these weak irritations, the cell finally begins to react to them. Thus in the laws of irritability we observe, as it were, the beginnings of memory, fatigue, and habit. The cell produces the illusion, if not of a conscious and reasoning being, at any rate of a remembering being, habit-forming, and susceptible to fatigue. If we can be thus deceived by a cell, how much more liable are we to be deceived by the greater complexity of animal life? But let us return to the analysis of actions. By the reflex actions of an organism are meant actions in which either an entire organism or its separate parts acts as a cell, i.e., within the limits of the law of variability. We observe such actions both in men and in animals. A man shudders all over from unexpected cold, or from a touch. His eyelids wink at the swift approach or touch of some object. The freely hanging foot of a person in a sitting position moves forward if the leg be struck on the tendon below the knee. These movements proceed independently of consciousness, they may even proceed counter to consciousness. Usually consciousness registers them as accomplished facts. Moreover, these movements are not at all governed by expediency. The foot moves forward in answer to the blow on the tendon even though a knife or a fire be in front of it. By instinctive actions are meant actions governed by expediency, but made without conscious selection or without conscious aim. They appear with the appearance of a sensuous tincture to sensations, i.e., from that moment when the sensation begins to be associated with a sense of pleasure or pain. As a matter of fact, before the dawn of human intellect, throughout the entire animal kingdom actions were governed by the tendency to receive or to retain pleasure, or to escape pain. We may declare with entire assurance that instinct is a pleasure-pain which, like the positive and negative poles of an electromagnet, repels and attracts the animal in this or that direction, compelling it to perform whole series of complex actions, sometimes expedient to such a degree that they appear to be sensible, and not only sensible, but founded upon foresight of the future, almost upon some clairvoyance. Like the migration of birds, the building of nests for the young which have not as yet appeared, the finding of the way south in the autumn, and north in the spring, etc. But all these actions are explained in reality by a single instinct, i.e., by the subservience to pleasure-pain. During periods in which millenniums may be regarded as days, by selection among all animals the types have been perfected, living along the lines of this subservience. This subservience is expedient, that is, the results of it lead to the desired goal. Why this is so is clear. Had the sense of pleasure arisen from that which is detrimental, the given species could not live, and would quickly die out. Instinct is the guide of its life, but only as long as instinct is expedient solely. Just as soon as it ceases to be expedient it becomes the guide of death, and the species soon dies out. Normally, pleasure-pain is pleasant or unpleasant not for the usefulness or the harm which may result, but because of it. Those influences which prove to be beneficial for a given species during the vegetative life, with the transition to the more active and complex animal life begin to be sensed as pleasant, the detrimental influences as unpleasant. As regards two different species, one and the same influence, say a certain temperature, may be useful and pleasant for one, and for another detrimental and unpleasant. It is clear, therefore, that the subservience to pleasure-pain must be governed by expediency. The pleasant is pleasant because it is beneficial, the unpleasant is unpleasant because it is harmful. Next, after instinctive actions follow those actions which are rational and automatic. By rational action is meant such an action as is known to the acting subject before its execution. Such an action as the acting subject can name, define, explain, can show its cause and purpose before its execution. Automatic actions are actions which have been rational for a given subject, but because of frequent repetitions they have become habitual and are performed unconsciously. The acquired automatic actions of trained animals were previously rational not in the animal, but in the trainer. Such actions often appear as rational, but this is a complete illusion. The animal remembers the sequence of actions, and therefore its actions appear to be considered and expedient. They really were considered, but not by it. Automatic actions are often confounded with instinctive ones. In reality they resemble instinctive ones, but there is an enormous difference between them. Automatic actions are developed by the subject during its own life, and for a long time before they become automatic it must be conscious of them. Instinctive actions, on the other hand, are developed during the life periods of the species, and the aptitude for them is transmitted in a definite manner by heredity. It is possible to call automatic actions instinctive actions worked out for itself by a given subject. It is impossible, however, to call instinctive actions automatic actions worked out by a given species, because they never were rational in different individuals of a given species, but were compounded out of a series of complex reflexes. Reflexes, instinctive and rational actions, all may be regarded as reflected, i.e., as not self-originated. Both these and others, and still a third class, come not from man himself, but from the outside world. Man is the transmitting or transforming station for certain forces. All of his actions in these three categories are created and determined by his impressions of the outside world. Man in these three species of actions is, in substance, an automaton, unconscious or conscious of his actions. Nothing comes from him himself. With the exception of sensations of the outer world, only the higher category of actions, i.e., conscious actions appears to depend on something else. But the aptitude for such actions is seldom met with, only in some few persons whom it is possible to describe as men of a higher type. Having established the differences between various kinds of actions, let us return to the question propounded before: in what manner does the psyche of an animal differ from that of a human being? Out of the four categories of actions the two lower ones are accessible to animals. The category of conscious actions is inaccessible to animals. This is proven first of all by the fact that animals have not the power of speech as we have it. As has been shown before, the possession of speech is indissolubly bound up with the possession of concepts. Therefore we may say that animals do not possess concepts. Is this true, and is it possible to possess the instinctive mind without possessing concepts? All that we know about the instinctive mind teaches us that it acts possessing sensations and perceptions only, and that in the lower grades it possesses sensation only. The being which does its thinking by means of perceptions possesses the instinctive mind which gives it the possibility of exercising that choice between the perceptions presented to it which produces the impression of judging and reasoning. In reality the animal does not reason its actions, but lives by its emotions, subject to that emotion which happens to be strongest. Although indeed, in the life of the animal, acute moments sometimes occur when it is confronted with the necessity of choosing among a certain series of perceptions. At such moments its actions may seem to be quite reasoned out. For example, the animal, being put in a situation of danger acts often very cautiously and wisely, but in reality its actions are directed not by thoughts but principally by emotional memory and motor perceptions. It has been previously shown that emotions are expedient, and that the subjection to them in a normal being must be expedient. Any perception of an animal, any recollected image, is bound up with some emotional sensation or emotional remembrance. There are no non-emotional, cold thoughts in the animal soul, or even if there are, these are inactive and incapable of becoming the springs of action. Thus all actions of animals, sometimes highly complex, expedient, and apparently reasoned, we can explain without attributing to them concepts, judgments, and the power of reasoning. Indeed, we must recognize that animals have no concepts, and the proof of this is that they have no speech. If we take two men of different nationalities, different races, each ignorant of the language of the other, and put them together, they will find a way to communicate at once. One perhaps draws a circle with his finger, the other draws another circle beside it. By these means they have already established that they can understand one another. If a thick wall were put between them it would not hamper them in the least. One of them knocks 3 times, and the other knocks 3 times in response. The communication is established. The idea of communicating with the inhabitants of other planets is founded upon the idea of light signals. It is proposed to make on the Earth an enormous lighted circle or a square to attract the attention of the inhabitants of Mars and to be answered by them by means of the same signal. We live side by side with animals and yet cannot establish such communication. Evidently the distance between us and them is greater, and the difference deeper, than between men divided by the ignorance of language, stone walls, and enormous distances. Another proof of the absence of concepts in the animal is its inability to use a lever, i.e., its incapacity to come independently to an understanding of the principle of the action of the lever. The usual objection that an animal cannot operate a lever because its organs, paws etc., are not adapted to such actions does not hold for the reason that almost any animal can be taught to operate a lever. This shows that the difficulty is not in the organs. The animal simply cannot of itself come to a comprehension of the idea of a lever. The invention of the lever immediately divided primitive man from the animal, and it was inextricably bound up with the appearance of concepts. The psychic side of the understanding of the action of a lever consists in the construction of a correct syllogism. Without constructing the syllogism correctly it is impossible to understand the action of a lever. Having no concepts it is impossible to construct the syllogism. The syllogism in the psychic sphere is literally the same thing as the lever in the physical sphere. His mastery of the lever differentiates man as strongly from the animal as does speech. If some learned Martians were looking at the Earth, and should study it objectively from afar by means of a telescope, not hearing speech, nor entering into the subjective world of the inhabitants of the Earth, nor coming in contact with them, they would divide the beings living on the Earth into 2 groups, those acquainted with the action of the lever, and those unacquainted with such action. The psychology of animals is in general very misty to us. The infinite number of observations made concerning all animals, from elephants to spiders, and the infinite number of anecdotes about the mind, spirit, and moral qualities of animals change nothing of all that. We represent animals to ourselves either as living automatons or as stupid men. We too much confine ourselves within the circle of our own psychology. We fail to imagine any other, and think involuntarily that the only possible sort of soul is such as we ourselves possess. But it is this illusion which prevents us from understanding life. If we could participate in the psychic life of an animal, understand how it perceives, thinks and acts, we would find much of unusual interest. For example, could we represent to ourselves, and recreate mentally, the logic of an animal, it would greatly help us to understand our own logic and the laws of our own thinking. Before all else we would come to understand the conditionality and relativity of our own logical construction and with it the conditionality of our entire conception of the world. An animal would have a peculiar logic. It indeed would not be logic in the true meaning of the word, because logic presupposes the existence of logos, i.e., of a word or concept. Our usual logic, by which we live, without which the shoemaker will not sew the boot, is deduced from the simple scheme formulated by Aristotle in those writings which were edited by his pupils under the common name of organon, i.e., the instrument of thought. This scheme consists in the following. A is A. A is not A. Everything is either A or not A. The logic embraced in this scheme, the logic of Aristotle, is quite sufficient for observation. But for experiment it is insufficient, because the experiment proceeds in time, and in the formulae of Aristotle time is not taken into consideration. This was observed at the very dawn of the establishment of our experimental science, observed by Roger Bacon, and formulated several centuries later by his famous namesake, Francis Bacon, Lord Verulam. In the treatise Novum Organum, the new instrument of thought. Briefly, the formulation of Bacon may be reduced to the following. That which was A, will be A. That which was not A, will be not A. Everything was and will be either A or not A. Upon these formula, acknowledged or unacknowledged, all our scientific experience is built, and upon them, too, is shoemaking founded, because if a shoemaker could not be sure that the leather bought yesterday would be leather tomorrow, in all probability he would not venture to make a pair of shoes, but would find some other more profitable employment. The formulae of logic, such as those both of Aristotle and of Bacon, are themselves deduced from the observation of facts, and do not and cannot include anything except the contents of these facts. They are not the laws of reasoning, but the laws of the outer world as it is perceived by us, or the laws of our relation to the outer world. Could we represent to ourselves the logic of an animal, we should understand its relation to the outer world. Our cardinal error concerning the psychology of animals consists in the fact that we ascribe to them our own logic. We assume that logic is one, that our logic is something absolute, existing outside and independent of us, while as a matter of fact, logic but formulates the laws of the relations of our psyche to the outside world. Or the laws which our psyche discovers in the outside world. Another psyche will discover other laws. The logic of animals will differ from ours, first of all, from the fact that it will not be general. It will exist separately for each case, for each perception. Common properties, class properties, and the generic and specific signs of categories will not exist for animals. Each object will exist in and by itself, and all its properties will be the specific properties of it alone. This house and that house are entirely different objects for an animal, because one is its house and the other is a strange house. Generally speaking, we recognize objects by the signs of their similarity. The animal must recognize them by the signs of their difference. It remembers each object by that sign which had for it the greatest emotional meaning. In such a manner, i.e., by their emotional tones, perceptions are stored in the memory of an animal. It is clear that such perceptions are much more difficult to store up in the memory, and therefore the memory of an animal is more burdened than ours, although in the amount of knowledge and in the quantity of that which is preserved in the memory, it stands far below us. After seeing an object once, we refer it to a certain class, genus and species, place it under this or that concept, and fix it in the mind by means of some word, i.e., algebraical symbol, then by another, defining it, and so on. The animal has no concepts, it has not that mental algebra by the help of which we think. It must know always a given object, and must remember it with all its signs and peculiarities. No forgotten sign will return. For us, on the other hand, the principal signs are contained in the concept with which we have correlated that object, and we can find it in our memory by means of the sign for it. From this it is clear that the memory of an animal is more burdened than ours, and this is the principal hindering cause to the mental evolution of an animal. Its mind is too busy. It has no time to develop. The mental development of a child may be arrested by making it memorize a series of words or a series of figures. The animal is in just such a position. Herein lies the explanation of the strange fact that an animal is wiser when it is young. In man the flower of intellectual force blooms at a mature age, often even in senility. In the animal, quite the reverse is true. It is receptive only while it is young. At maturity its development stops, and in old age it undoubtedly degenerates. The logic of animals, were we to attempt to express it by means of formulae similar to those employed by Aristotle and Bacon, would be as follows. The formula A is A, the animal will understand. It will say, as it were, I am I, etc. But the formula, A is not A, it will be incapable of understanding. Not A is indeed the concept. The animal will reason thus. This is this. That is that. This is not that. Or, this man is this man. That man is that man. This man is not that man. I shall be obliged to return to the logic of animals later on. For the present it is only necessary to establish the fact that the psychology of animals is peculiar, and differs in a fundamental way from our own. And not only is it peculiar, but it is decidedly manifold. Among the animals known to us, even among domestic animals, the psychological differences are so great as to differentiate them into entirely separate planes. We ignore this, and place them all under a single rubric, animals. A goose, having entangled its foot in a piece of watermelon rind, drags it along by the web and thus cannot get it out, but it never thinks of raising its foot. This indicates that its mind is so vague that it does not know its own body, scarcely distinguishing between it and other objects. This would happen neither with a dog nor with a cat. They know their bodies very well. But in relation to outside objects the dog and the cat differ widely. I have observed a dog, a very intelligent setter. When the little rug on which he slept got folded and was uncomfortable to sleep on, he understood that the nuisance was outside of him, that it was in the rug, and in a certain definite position of the rug. Therefore he caught the rug in his teeth, turned it and pushed it here and there, the while growling, sighing, and moaning until some one came to his aid, for he was never able to rectify the difficulty. With the cat such a question could not even appear. The cat knows her body very well, but everything outside of herself she takes as her due, as given. To correct the outside world, to accommodate it to her own comfort, never comes into the cat's head. Perhaps this is because she lives more in another world, in the world of dreams and fantasies, than in this. Accordingly, if there were something wrong with her bed the cat would turn herself about repeatedly until she could lie down comfortably, or she would go and lie in another place. The monkey would spread the rug very easily indeed. Here we have four beings, all quite different, and this is only one example. It would be possible to collect others by the hundred. And meanwhile there is for us just one animal. We mix together many things that are entirely different. Our divisions are often incorrect, and this hinders us when it comes to the examination of ourselves. To declare that manifest differences determine that evolutionary grade, that animals of one type are higher or lower than those of another, would be entirely false. The dog and the monkey by their intellect, their aptness to imitate, and by reason of the dog's fidelity to man, are as it were higher than the cat, but the cat is infinitely superior to them in intuition, aesthetic sense, independence, and force of will. The dog and the monkey manifest themselves in toto, all that they have is seen. The cat, on the other hand, is not without reason regarded as a magical and occult animal. In her there is much hidden of which she herself does not know. If one speaks in terms of evolution, it is more correct to say that the cat and the dog are animals of different evolutions, just as in all probability, not one, but several evolutions are simultaneously going forward in humanity. The recognition of several independent and from one standpoint equivalent evolutions, developing entirely different properties, would lead us out of a labyrinth of endless contradictions in our understanding of man and would show us the path to the only real and important evolution for us, the evolution into Superman. Chapter 9. The receptivity of the world by a man and by an animal. Illusions of the animal and its lack of control of the receptive faculties. The world of moving planes. Angles and curves considered as motion. The third dimension as motion. The animal's two-dimensional view of our three-dimensional world. The animal as a real two-dimensional being. Lower animals as one-dimensional beings. The time and space of a snail. The time sense as an imperfect space sense. The time and space of a dog. The change in the world coincident with a change in the psychic apparatus. The proof of Kant's problem. The three-dimensional world, an illusionary perception. We have established the enormous difference existing between the psychology of a man and of an animal. This difference undoubtedly profoundly affects the receptivity of the outer world by the animal. But how and in what? This is exactly what we do not know, and what we shall try to discover. To this end we shall return to our receptivity of the world, investigate in detail the nature of that receptivity, and then imagine how the animal, with its more limited psychic equipment, receives its impression of the world. Let us note first of all that we receive the most incorrect impressions of the world as regards its outer form and aspect. We know that the world consists of solids, but we see and touch only surfaces. We never see and touch a solid. The solid, this is indeed a concept, composed of a series of perceptions, the result of reasoning and experience. For immediate sensation, surfaces alone exist. Sensations of gravity, mass, volume, which we mentally associate with the solid, are in reality associated with the sensations of surfaces. We only know that the sensation comes from the solid, but the solid itself we never sense. Perhaps it would be possible to call the complex sensation of surfaces, weight, mass, density, resistance, the sensation of a solid, but rather do we combine mentally all these sensations into one, and call that composite sensation a solid. We sense directly only surfaces, the weight and resistance of the solid, as such, we never separately sense. But we know that the world does not consist of surfaces, we know that we see the world incorrectly, and that we never see it as it is, not alone in the philosophical meaning of the expression, but in the most simple geometrical meaning. We have never seen a cube, a sphere, etc., but only their surfaces. Knowing this, we mentally correct that which we see. Behind the surfaces we think the solid. But we can never even represent the solid to ourselves. We cannot imagine the cube or the sphere seen, not in perspective, but simultaneously from all sides. It is clear that the world does not exist in perspective, nevertheless we cannot see it otherwise. We see everything only in perspective. That is, in the very act of receptivity the world is distorted in our eye, and we know that it is distorted. We know that it is not such as it appears, and mentally we are continuously correcting that which the eye sees, substituting the real content for those symbols of things which sight reveals. Our sight is a complex faculty. It consists of visual sensations plus the memory of sensations of touch. The child tries to feel with its fingertips everything that it sees, the nose of its nurse, the moon, the reflection of sun rays from the mirror on the wall. Only gradually does it learn to discern the near and the distant by means of sight alone. But we know that even in mature age we are easily subject to optical illusions. We see distant objects as flat, even more incorrectly, because relief is after all a symbol revealing a certain property of objects. A man at a long distance is pictured to us in silhouette. This happens because we never feel anything at a long distance, and the eye has not been taught to discern the difference in surfaces which at short distances are felt by the fingertips. 11. We can never see, even in the minute, any part of the outer world as it is, that is, as we know it. We can never see the desk or the wardrobe all at once, from all sides and inside. Our eye distorts the outside world in a certain way, in order that, looking about, we may be able to define the position of objects relatively to ourselves. But to look at the world from any other standpoint than our own is impossible for us, nor can we ever see it correctly, without distortion by our sight. Relief and perspective, these constitute the distortions of the object by our eye. They are optical illusions, delusions of sight. The cube in perspective is but a conventional sign of the three-dimensional cube, and all that we see is the conditional image of that conditionally real three-dimensional world with which our geometry deals, and not that world itself. On the basis of what we see we surmise that it exists in reality. We know that what we see is incorrect, and we think of the world as other than it appears. If we had no doubt about the correctness of our sight, if we knew that the world were such as it appears, then obviously we should think of the world in the manner in which we see it. In reality we are constantly engaged in making corrections. It is clear that the ability to make corrections in that which the eye sees demands, undoubtedly, the possession of the concept, because the corrections are made by a process of reasoning, which is impossible without concepts. Deprived of the faculty to make corrections in that which the eye sees, we should have a different outlook on the world, i.e., much of that which is we should see incorrectly. We should not see much of that which is, but we should see much of that which does not exist in reality at all. First of all, we should see an enormous number of non-existent motions. Every motion of ours in our direct sensation of it, is bound up with the motion of everything around us. We know that this motion is an illusory one, but we see it as real. Objects turn in front of us, run past us, overtake one another. If we are riding slowly past houses, these turn slowly, if we are riding fast they turn quickly, also, trees grow up before us unexpectedly, run away and disappear. This seeming animation of objects, coupled with dreams, has always inspired, and still inspires the fairy tale. The motions of objects, to a person in motion, are very complex indeed. Observe how strangely the field of wheat behaves just beyond the window of the car in which you are riding. It runs to the very window, stops, turns slowly around itself and runs away. The trees of the forest run apparently at different speeds, overtaking one another. The entire landscape is one of illusory motion. Behold also the sun, which even up to the present time rises, and sets, in all languages, this motion having been in the past so passionately defended. This is all seeming, and though we know that these motions are illusory, we see them nevertheless, and sometimes we are deluded. To how many more illusions should we be subject had we not the power of mentally analyzing their determining causes, but were obliged to believe that everything exists as it appears. I see it, therefore this exists. This affirmation is the principal source of all illusions. To be true, it is necessary to say, I see it, therefore this does not exist, or at least, I see it, therefore this is not so. Although we can say the last, the animal cannot, for to its apprehension things are as they appear. It must believe what it sees. How does the world appear to the animal? The world appears to it as a series of complicated moving surfaces. The animal lives in a world of two dimensions. Its universe has for it the properties and appearance of a surface. And upon this surface transpire an enormous number of different movements of a most fantastic character. Why should the world appear to the animal as a surface? First of all, because it appears as a surface to us. But we know that the world is not a surface, and the animal can not know it. It accepts everything just as it appears. It is powerless to correct the testimony of its eyes, or it cannot do so to the extent that we do. We are able to measure in three mutually independent directions, the nature of our mind permits us to do this. The animal can measure simultaneously in two directions only, it can never measure in three directions at once. This is due to the fact that, not possessing concepts, it is unable to retain in the mind the idea of the first two directions, for measuring the third. Let me explain this more exactly. Suppose we imagine that we are measuring the cube. In order to measure the cube in three directions, it is necessary while measuring in one direction, to keep in mind two others, to remember. But it is possible to keep them in mind as concepts only, that is, associating them with different concepts, pasting upon them different labels. So, pasting upon the first two directions the labels of length and breadth, it is possible to measure the height. It is impossible otherwise. As perceptions, the first two measurements of the cube are completely identical, and assuredly will mingle into one in the mind. The animal, without the aid of concepts, cannot paste upon the first two measurements the labels of length and breadth. Therefore, at the moment when it begins to measure the height of the cube, the first two measurements will be confused in one. The animal, attempting to measure the cube by means of perceptions only without the aid of concepts, will be like a cat I once observed. Her kittens, 5 or 6 in number, she dragged asunder into different rooms, and could not then collect them together. She seized one, put it beside another, ran for a third and brought it to the first two, but then she seized the first and carried it away to another room, putting it beside the fourth. After that she ran back, seized the second and dragged it to the room containing the fifth, and so on. For a whole hour the cat had no rest with her kittens, she suffered severely, and could accomplish nothing. It is clear that she lacked the concepts which would enable her to remember how many kittens she had altogether. It is in the highest degree important to understand the relation of the animal consciousness to the measuring of bodies. The great point is that the animal sees surfaces only. We may say this with complete assurance, because we ourselves see surfaces only. Thus seeing only surfaces the animal can imagine but two dimensions. The third dimension, in contradistinction to the other two, can only be thought, that is, this dimension must be a concept, but animals do not possess concepts. The third dimension like the others appears as a perception. Therefore, at the moment of its appearance, the first two will inevitably mingle into one. The animal is capable of perceiving the difference between two dimensions, the difference between three it cannot perceive. This difference must be known beforehand, and to know it concepts are necessary. Identical perceptions mix into one for the animal, just as we ourselves confuse two simultaneous, similar phenomena proceeding from the same point. For the animal it will be one phenomenon, just as for us all similar, simultaneous phenomena proceeding from a single point will be one phenomenon. Therefore the animal will see the world as a surface, and will measure this surface in two directions only. But how is it possible to explain the fact that the animal, inhabiting a two-dimensional world, or rather, perceiving itself as in a two-dimensional world, is perfectly oriented in our three-dimensional world? How explain the fact that the bird flies up and down, sideways and straight ahead, in all three directions, that the horse jumps over ditches and barriers? That the dog and cat appear to understand the properties of depth and height simultaneously with those of length and breadth? In order to explain these things it is necessary to return to the fundamental principles of animal psychology. It has been previously shown that many properties of objects remembered by us as general properties of genus, class, species, are remembered by animals as individual properties of objects. To orientate in this enormous reserve of individual properties preserved in the memory, animals are assisted by the emotional tone which is linked up in them with each perception and each remembered sensation. For example, an animal knows two roads as two entirely separate phenomena having nothing in common, that is, one road consists of a series of definite perceptions colored by definite emotional tones. The other phenomenon, the other road, consists of another series of definite perceptions colored with other tones. We say that this, that, and the other are roads. One leads to one place, a second to another. For an animal the two roads have nothing in common. But it remembers in their proper sequence all the emotional tones which are linked with the first road and with the second one, and it therefore remembers both roads with their turns, ditches, fences, etc. Thus the remembering of definite properties of observed objects helps the animal to find itself in the world of phenomena. But as a rule before new phenomena an animal is much more helpless than a man. An animal sees two dimensions. The third dimension it senses constantly, but does not see. It senses the third dimension as something transient, just as we sense time. The surfaces which an animal sees possess for it many strange properties. First of all, numerous and various motions. As has been said already, all those illusory motions which seem to us real, but which we know to be illusory, are entirely real to the animal, the turning about of the houses as we ride past, the growth of a tree out of some corner, the passing of the moon between clouds, etc. etc. But in addition to all this, many motions must exist for the animal of which we have no suspicion. The fact is that innumerable objects quite immobile for us, properly all objects, must seem to the animal to be in motion. And the third dimension of solids will appear to it in these motions, i.e., the third dimension of solids will appear to it as a motion. Underscore 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 underscore. Let us try to imagine how the animal perceives the objects of the outer world. Suppose it is confronted with a large disk, and simultaneously with a large sphere of the same diameter. Standing directly opposite them at a certain distance, the animal will see two circles. Beginning to walk around them, it will observe that the sphere remains a circle, while the disc gradually narrows, transforming itself into a narrow strip. On moving farther around, the strip begins to expand and gradually transforms itself into a circle. The sphere will not change during this circumambulation. But when the animal approaches toward it, certain strange phenomena ensue. Let us try to understand how the animal will perceive the surface of the sphere as contrasted with the surface of the disk. One thing is sure, it will perceive the spherical surface differently from us. We perceive convexity or sphericality as a common property of many surfaces. The animal, on the contrary, because of the very properties of its psychic apparatus, will perceive that sphericality as an individual property of a given sphere. Now how will this sphericality as an individual property of a given sphere appear to it? We may declare with complete assurance that the sphericality will appear to the animal as a movement on the surface which it sees. During the approach of the animal toward the sphere, something like the following must happen: the surface which the animal sees starts to move quickly. Its center spreads out, and all of the other points run away from the center with a velocity proportional to their distance from the center, or the square of their distance from the center. It is in this way that the animal senses the spherical surface, much as we sense sound. At a certain distance from the sphere, the animal perceives it as a plane. Approaching or touching some point on the sphere, it sees that all other points have changed with relation to this particular point, they have all altered their position on the plane, have moved to one side, as it were. Touching another point, it sees that all the rest have moved in similar fashion. This property of the sphere will appear as its motion, its vibration. The sphere will actually resemble a vibrating, oscillating surface, in the same way that each angle of an immobile object will appear to the animal as a motion. The animal can see an angle of a three-dimensional object only while moving past it, and during the time it takes, the object will seem to the animal to have turned, a new side has appeared, and the side first seen has disappeared or moved away. The angle will be perceived as rotation, as the motion of the object, i.e., as something transient, temporal, as a change of state in the object. Remembering the angles which it has seen before, seen as the motion of bodies, the animal will consider that they have ceased, have ended, have disappeared, that they are in the past. Of course the animal cannot reason in this way, but it acts as though it had thus reasoned. Could the animal think about those phenomena which have not yet entered into its life, i.e., angles and curved surfaces, it would undoubtedly imagine them in time only, it could not prefigure for them any real existence at the present moment when they have not yet appeared. And were it able to express an opinion on this subject, it would say that angles exist in potentiality, that they will be, but that for the present they do not exist. The angle of a house past which a horse runs every day is a phenomenon, repeating under certain circumstances, but nevertheless a phenomenon proceeding in time, and not a spatial and constant property of the house. For the animal the angle will be a temporal phenomenon and not a spatial one, as it is for us. Thus we see that the animal will perceive the properties of our third dimension as motions, and will refer these properties to time, i.e., to the past or future, or to the present, the moment of the transition of the future into the past. This circumstance is in the highest degree important, for therein lies the key to our own receptivity of the world. We shall therefore examine into it more in detail. Up to the present time we have taken into consideration only the higher animals, the dog, the cat, the horse. Let us now try the lower. Let us take the snail. We know nothing about its inner life, but undoubtedly its receptivity resembles ours scarcely at all. In all probability the snail possesses some obscure sensations of its environment. Probably it feels heat, cold, light, darkness, hunger, and it instinctively, i.e., urged by pleasure-pain guidance, strives to reach the uneaten edge of the leaf on which it rests, and instinctively avoids the dead leaf. Its movements are guided by pleasure-pain, it constantly strives toward the one, and away from the other. It always moves upon a single line, from the unpleasant to the pleasant, and in all probability except for this line it is not conscious of anything and does not sense anything. This line is its entire world. All sensations, entering from the outside, the snail senses upon this line of its motion, and these come to it out of time, from the potential they become the present. For the snail our entire universe exists in the future and in the past, i.e. in time. In space only one line exists, all the rest is time. It is more than probable that the snail is not conscious of its movements. Making efforts with its entire body it moves forward to the fresh edge of the leaf, but it seems as if the leaf were coming to it, appearing at that moment, coming out of time as the morning comes to us. The snail is a one-dimensional being. The higher animals, the dog, cat, the horse, are two-dimensional beings. To the higher animal all space appears as a surface, as a plane. Everything out of this plane lives for it in time. Thus we see that the higher animal, the two-dimensional being compared with the one-dimensional, extracts or captures from time one more dimension. The world of a snail has one dimension, our second and third dimensions are for it in time. The world of a dog is two-dimensional, our third dimension is for it in time. An animal can remember all phenomena which it has observed, i.e. all properties of three-dimensional solids with which it has come in contact, but it cannot know that the, for it, recurring phenomenon is a constant property of the three-dimensional solid, an angle, curvature, or convexity. Such is the psychology of the receptivity of the world by a two-dimensional being. For such a being a new sun will rise every day. Yesterday's sun is gone, and will not appear again, tomorrow's does not as yet exist. Rostand did not understand the psychology of Chanticleer. The cock could not think that he woke up the sun by his crowing. To him the sun does not go to sleep, it goes into the past, disappears, suffers annihilation, ceases to be. If it comes on the morrow it will be a new sun, just as for us with every new year comes a new spring. In order to be the sun shall not wake up, but arise, be born. The cock, if it could think without losing its characteristic psychology, could not believe in the appearance today of the same sun which was yesterday. This is purely human reasoning. For the animal a new sun rises every morning, just as for us a new morning comes with every day and a new spring with every year. The animal is not in a position to understand that the sun is the same yesterday and today, exactly in the same way that we probably cannot understand that the morning is the same and the spring is the same. The motion of objects which is not illusory, even for us, but a real motion, like that of a revolving wheel, a passing carriage, and so on, will differ for the animal very much from that motion which it sees in all objects which are for us immobile, i.e., from that motion in which the third dimension of solids is as it were revealed to it. The first mentioned motion, real for us, will seem to the animal arbitrary, alive. And these two kinds of motion will be incommensurable for it. The animal will be in a position to measure an angle or a convex surface, though not understanding their true nature, and though regarding them as motion. But true motion, i.e., that which is true motion to us, it will never be in a position to measure, because for this it is necessary to possess our concept of time, and to measure all motions with reference to some one more constant motion, i.e., to compare all motions with some one. Without concepts the animal is powerless to do this. Therefore for us, real motions of objects will be incommensurable for it, and being incommensurable, will be incommensurable with other motions which are real and measurable for it, but which are illusory for us, motions which in reality represent the third dimension of solids. This last conclusion is inevitable. If the animal apprehends and measures as motion that which is not motion, clearly it cannot measure by one and the same standard that which is motion and that which is not motion. But this does not mean that it cannot know the character of motions going on in the world and cannot conform itself to them. On the contrary, we see that the animal orientates itself perfectly among the motions of the objects of our three-dimensional world. Here comes into play the aid of instinct, i.e., the ability, developed by millenniums of selection, to act expediently without consciousness of purpose. Moreover, the animal discerns perfectly the motions going on around it. But discerning two kinds of phenomena, two kinds of motion, the animal will explain one of them by means of some incomprehensible inner property of objects, i.e. in all probability it will regard this motion as the result of the animation of objects, and the moving objects as animated beings. The kitten plays with the ball or with its tail because ball and tail are running away from it. The bear will fight with the beam which threatens to throw him off the tree, because in the swinging beam he senses something alive and hostile. The horse is frightened by the bush because the hush unexpectedly turned and waved a branch. In the last case the bush need not even have moved at all, for the horse was running, and it seemed therefore as though the bush moved, and consequently that it was animated. In all probability all movement is thus animated for the animal. Why does the dog bark so desperately at the passing carriage? This is not entirely clear to us, for we do not realize that to the eyes of the dog the carriage is turning, twisting, grimacing all over. It is alive in every part, the wheels, the top, the mudguards, seats, passengers, all these are moving, turning. Underscore. Now let us draw certain conclusions from all of the foregoing. We have established the fact that man possesses sensations, perceptions and concepts, that the higher animals possess sensations and perceptions, and the lower animals sensations only. The conclusion that animals have no concepts we deduced from the fact that they have no speech. Next we have established that having no concepts, animals cannot comprehend the third dimension, but see the world as a surface, i.e. they have no means, no instrument, for the correction of their incorrect sensations of the world. Furthermore, we have found that seeing the world as a surface, animals see upon this surface many motions which for us are non-existent. That is, all those properties of solids which we regard as the properties of three-dimensionality, animals represent to themselves as motions. Thus the angle and the spherical surface appear to them as the movements of a plane. After that we came to the conclusion that everything which we regard as constant in the region of the third dimension, animals regard as transient things which happen to objects, temporal phenomena. Thus in all its relations to the world the animal is quite analogous to the imagined, unreal two-dimensional being living upon a plane. All our world appears to the animal as the plane through which phenomena are passing, moving upon time, or in time. And so we may say that we have established the following, that under certain limitations of the psychic apparatus for receiving the outer world, for the subject possessing this apparatus, the entire aspect and all properties of the world will suffer change. And two subjects, living side by side, but possessing different psychic apparatus, will inhabit different worlds, the properties of the extension of the world will be different for them. And we observed the conditions, not invented for the purpose, not concocted in imagination, but really existing in nature, that is, the psychic conditions governing the lives of animals, under which the world appears as a plane or as a line. That is to say, we have established that the three-dimensional extension of the world depends upon the properties of our psychic apparatus. Or, that the three-dimensionality of the world is not its property, but a property of our receptivity of the world. In other words, the three-dimensionality of the world is a property of its reflection in our consciousness. If all this is so, then it is obvious that we have really proved the dependence of space upon the space sense. And if we have proved the existence of a space sense lower in comparison with ours, by this we have proved the possibility of a space sense higher in comparison with ours. And we shall grant that if in us there develops the fourth unit of reasoning as different from the concept as the concept is different from perception, so simultaneously with it will appear for us in the surrounding world a fourth characteristic which we may designate geometrically as the fourth direction or the fourth perpendicular. Because in this characteristic will be included the properties of objects perpendicular to all properties known to us, and not parallel to any of them. In other words, we shall see, or we shall feel ourselves in a space not of three, but of four dimensions. And in the objects surrounding us, and in our own bodies, will appear common properties of the fourth dimension which we did not notice before, or which we regarded as individual properties of objects, or their motion. Just as animals regard the extension of objects in the third dimension as their motion. And when we shall see or feel ourselves in the world of 4 dimensions, we shall see that the world of 3 dimensions does not really exist and has never existed, that it was the creation of our own fantasy, a phantom host, an optical illusion. A delusion, anything one pleases excepting only reality. And all this is not an hypothesis, not a supposition, but exact fact, just such a fact as the existence of infinity. For positivism to ensure its existence, it was necessary to annihilate infinity somehow, or at least to call it an hypothesis, which may or may not be true. Infinity, however, is not an hypothesis, but a fact, and such a fact is the multidimensionality of space and all that it implies, namely, the unreality of everything three-dimensional. Chapter 10. The Spatial Understanding of Time. The angles and curves of the 4th dimension in our life. Does motion exist in the world or not? Mechanical motion and life. Biological phenomena as the manifestation of motions going on in the higher dimension. Evolution of the space sense. The growth of the space sense and the diminution of the time sense. The transformation of the time sense into the space sense. The difficulties of our language and of our concepts. The necessity for seeking a method of spatial expression for temporal concepts. Science in relation to the 4th dimension. The solid of 4 dimensions. The 4-dimensional sphere. Now, from the basis of those conclusions already made, let us seek to define how we may discover the real 4-dimensional world obscured from us by the illusory 3-dimensional world. See it we may by 2 methods, either by sensing it directly, by developing the space sense and other higher faculties, which will be discussed later. Or by understanding it mentally by a perception of its possible properties through the exercise of the reason. By abstract reasoning, we have already come to the conclusion that the 4th dimension of space must lie in time, i.e., that time is the 4th dimension of space. We have already discovered psychological proofs of this thesis. Comparing the receptivity of the world by living beings of different grades of consciousness, snail, dog and man, we have seen how different for them are the properties of one and the same world. Namely, those properties which are expressed for us in the concepts of time and space. We have seen that time and space are sensed by each in a different manner, that what for the lower being, the snail, is time, for the being standing 1 degree higher, the dog, becomes space. And that the time of this being becomes space to a being standing still higher, man. This is a confirmation of the supposition previously expressed, that our idea of time is complex in its nature, and that in it are properly included 2 ideas, that of a certain space and that of motion upon this space. Or to put the matter more exactly, the contact with a certain space of which we are not clearly conscious calls forth in us the sensation of motion upon that space, and all this taken together, i.e., the unclear consciousness of a certain space and the sensation of motion upon that space, we call time. This last confirms the conception that the idea of time has not arisen from the observation of motion existing in nature, but that the very sensation and idea of motion has arisen from a time sense existing in ourselves. Which is an imperfect sense of space, the fringe or limit of our space sense. The snail feels the line as space, i.e., as something constant. It feels the rest of the world as time, i.e., as something eternally moving. The horse feels the plain as space. It feels the rest of the world as time. We feel an infinite sphere as space, the rest of the world, that which was yesterday and that which will be tomorrow, we feel as time. In other words, every being feels as space that which is grasped by his space sense, the rest he refers to time. I.e., the imperfectly felt is referred to time. Or it is possible to formulate the matter thus: every being feels as space that which, by the aid of his space sense he is able to represent to himself in form, outside of himself. And that which he is not able thus to represent he feels as time, i.e., eternally moving, impermanent, so unstable that it is impossible to imagine it in terms of form. The sense of space, space sense, is the power of representation by means of form. The infinite sphere, by which we represent the universe to ourselves is constantly and continuously changing, in every consecutive moment it is not that which it was before. A constant change of pictures, images, relations, is going on therein. It is for us as it were the screen of a cinematograph upon which the swiftly running images of pictures appear and disappear. But where are the pictures themselves? Where is the light throwing the image upon the screen? Whence do the pictures come, and whither do they go? If the infinite sphere is the screen of the cinematograph, so our consciousness is the light, penetrating through our psyche, i.e. through the stores of our impressions, pictures, it, the light, throws upon the screen their images which we call life. But where do the impressions come from to us? From the same screen. And herein dwells the most incomprehensible mystery of life as we see it. We are creating it and we are receiving everything from it. Imagine a man sitting in the ordinary moving picture theater. Imagine that he knows nothing of the construction of the cinematograph, nothing of the existence of the lantern behind his back, nor of the small transparent picture on the moving film. Let us imagine that he wants to study the cinematograph, and begins to study that which proceeds on the screen, to make notes, to take pictures, to observe the order, to calculate, to construct hypotheses, and so forth. At what will he arrive? Evidently at nothing at all, unless he will turn his back to the screen, and will begin to study the cause of the appearance of the pictures upon the screen. The cause is confined in the lantern, i.e. in consciousness, and in the moving films of pictures, in the psyche. These it is necessary to study, desiring to understand the cinematograph. Positive philosophy studies only the screen and the pictures passing upon it. For this reason the eternal enigma remains for it: wherefrom are the pictures coming and where are they going, and why are they coming and going instead of remaining eternally the same? But it is necessary to study the cinematograph beginning with the source of light, i.e., with consciousness, then to pass on to the pictures on the moving film, and only after that to study the projected image. We have established that the animal, the horse, the cat, the dog, must perceive the immobile angles and curves of the third dimension as motion, i.e., as temporal phenomena. The question arises, do not we perceive as motion, i.e. as temporal phenomena, the immobile angles and curves of the fourth dimension? We ordinarily say that our sensations are the moments of the apprehension of certain changes proceeding outside of us, such are sound, light, etc. All vibrations of the ether. But what are these changes? Perhaps in reality there are no changes at all. Perhaps the immobile sides and angles of certain things which exist outside of us, of certain things which we know nothing about, only appear to us as motions, i.e., as changes. It may be that our consciousness, not being able to embrace these things with the aid of the organs of sense, and to represent them to itself in their entirety, just as they are, and grasping only the separate moments of its contact with them, is constructing the illusion of motion, and conceives that something is moving outside of it, of consciousness, i.e., that the things are themselves moving. If such is the case, then motion must be in reality something only derived, arising in our intellect during its contact with things which it does not grasp in their totality. Let us imagine that we are approaching an unknown city, and that it is slowly growing up before us as we approach. It appears to us as if it is really growing up, i.e., as though it did not exist before. There disappeared the river, which was visible for so long a time, there appeared the bell tower, which was invisible before. Such, exactly, is our relation to time, which is a continual coming, arising, as it were, from nothing and going into naught. Everything lies for us in time, and only the section of the thing lies in space. Transferring our consciousness from the section of the thing to those parts of it which lie in time, we receive the illusion of motion on the part of the thing itself. It is possible to formulate the matter thus: the sensation of motion is the consciousness of the transition from space to time, i.e., from a clear space sense to one that is unclear. With this in mind, it is not difficult to realize that we are receiving as sensations, and projecting into the outside world as phenomena, the immobile angles and curves of the fourth dimension. On this account is it not necessary and possible to recognize that the world is immobile and constant, and that it seems to us to be moving and evolving simply because we are looking at it through the narrow slit of our sensuous receptivity? We are returning again to the question, what is the world and what is consciousness? But now the question concerning the relation of our consciousness to the world is beginning to be formulated for us. If the world is a great something, possessing the consciousness of itself, so we are rays of that consciousness which are conscious of themselves, but unconscious of the whole. Underscore. If there be no motion, if it be an illusion, then we must search further, whence could this illusion have arisen? The phenomena of life, biological phenomena, much resemble the transition through our space of certain four-dimensional circles, the circles being extremely complicated, every one consisting of a great number of interlaced lines. The life of a man or of any other living being suggests a complicated circle. It begins always at one point, birth, and ends always at one point, death. We have complete justification for supposing that it is one and the same point. The circles are large and small, but they begin and end similarly, and they end at the same point where they began, i.e., at the point of non-existence, from the physico-biological standpoint, or of some existence other than the psychological one. What is the biological phenomenon, the phenomenon of life? Our science does not answer this question. This is the enigma. In the living organism, in the living cell, in the living protoplasm there is something indefinable, differentiating, living matter from dead matter. We recognize this something only by its functions. The chief of these functions is the power of self-reproduction, absent in the dead organism, the dead cell, dead matter. The living organism multiplies infinitely, incorporating and assimilating dead matter into itself. This ability to reproduce itself and to absorb dead matters with its mechanical laws is the inexplicable function of life, showing that life is not simply a complex of mechanical forces, as the positivist philosophy attempts to prove. This thesis, that life is not a complex of mechanical forces, is corroborated also by the incommensurability of the phenomena of mechanical motion with the phenomena of life. Life phenomena cannot be expressed in terms of mechanical energy, calories of heat or units of horsepower, nor can the phenomena of life be artificially created by the physico-chemical method. If we shall regard every separate life as a circle of the fourth dimension, this will make clear to us why every circle is inevitably escaping from our space. This happens because the circle inevitably ends in the same point at which it began, and the life of the separate being, beginning with birth, must end in death, which is the return to the point of departure. But during its transit through our space, the circle puts forth from itself certain lines, which, uniting with others, yield new circles. In reality, of course, all this proceeds quite otherwise. Nothing is born and nothing dies. It only so represents itself to us, because we see but the sections of things. In reality, the circle of life is only the section of something, and that something undoubtedly exists before birth, i.e., before the appearance of the circle in our space, and continues to exist after death, i.e., after the disappearance of the circle from the field of our vision. To our observation the phenomena of life are similar to the phenomena of motion as these appear to the two-dimensional being, and therefore it may be that this is the motion in the fourth dimension. We have seen that the two-dimensional being is bound to regard the properties of the three-dimensionality of solids as motions, and the real motions of solids, going on in the higher space as the phenomena of life. In other words, that motion which remains a motion in the higher space appears to the lower being as a phenomenon of life, and that which disappears in the higher space, transforming itself into the property of an immobile solid, appears to the lower being as mechanical motion. The phenomena of life and the phenomena of motion are just as incommensurable for us as are the two kinds of motion in its world for the two-dimensional being, one of these motions being real and the other illusory. Hinton says of this incommensurability, there is something in life not included in our conception of mechanical movement. Is this something a four-dimensional movement? If we look at it from the broadest point of view, there is something striking in the fact that where life comes in there arises an entirely different set of phenomena from those of the inorganic world. 12. Upon this basis it is justifiable to assume that those phenomena which we call the phenomena of life are movements in higher space. Those phenomena which we call mechanical motion become in turn the phenomena of life in a space lower relatively to ours, and in one higher, simply the properties of immobile solids. This means that if we consider three kinds of existence, the two-dimensional, ours, and the higher dimensional, then it will appear that the motion, which is observed by the two-dimensional being in two-dimensional space, is for us a property of immobile solids. Life, as it is apprehended in two-dimensional space, is motion as we observe it in our space. Moreover, motions in three-dimensional space, i.e., all our mechanical motions and the manifestations of physico-chemical forces, light, sound, heat, etc., are only our sensations of some to us incomprehensible properties of four-dimensional solids. And our phenomena of life are the motions of solids of higher space which appear to us as the birth, growth, and life of living beings. But if we presuppose a space not of four, but of 5 dimensions, then in it the phenomena of life would probably appear as the properties of immobile solids, genus, species, families, peoples, races, and so forth, and motions would seem, perhaps, only the phenomena of thought. We know that the phenomena of motion or the manifestations of energy are involved with the expenditure of time, and we see how, with the gradual transcendence of the lower space by the higher, motion disappears, being converted into the properties of immobile solids. I.e., the expenditure of time disappears, and the necessity for time. To the two-dimensional being time is necessary for the understanding of the most simple phenomena, an angle, a hill, a ditch. For us time is not necessary for the understanding of such phenomena, but is necessary for the explanation of the phenomena of motion and physical phenomena. In a space still higher, our phenomena of motion and physical phenomena would probably be regarded independently of time, as properties of immobile solids. And biological phenomena, birth, growth, reproduction, death, would be regarded as phenomena of motion. Thus we see how the idea of time recedes with the expansion of consciousness. We see its complete conditionality. We see that by time are designated the characteristics of a space relatively higher than a given space, i.e., the characteristics of the perceptions of a consciousness relatively higher than a given consciousness. For the one-dimensional being all the indices of 2-, 3-, 4-dimensional space and beyond, lie in time, all this is time. For the two-dimensional being time embraces within itself the indices of 3-dimensional space, 4-dimensional space, and all spaces beyond. For man, i.e., the three-dimensional being, time contains the indices of 4-dimensional space and all spaces beyond. Therefore, according to the degree of expansion and elevation of the consciousness and the forms of its receptivity, the indices of space are augmented and the indices of time are diminished. In other words, the growth of the space sense is proceeding at the expense of the time sense. Or one may say that the time sense is an imperfect space sense, i.e., an imperfect power of representation which, being perfected, translates itself into the space sense, i.e., into the power of representation in forms. If, taking as a foundation the principles elucidated here, we attempt to represent to ourselves the universe very abstractedly, it is clear that this will be quite other than the universe which we are accustomed to imagine to ourselves. Everything will exist in it always. This will be the universe of the eternal now of Hindu philosophy, a universe in which will be neither before nor after, in which will be just one present, known or unknown. Hinton feels that with the expansion of the space sense our vision of the world will change completely, and he tells about this in his book, A New Era of Thought. Page 66. The conception which we shall form of the universe will undoubtedly be as different from our present one, as the Copernican view differs from the more pleasant view of a wide, immovable earth beneath a vast vault. Indeed, any conception of our place in the universe will be more agreeable than the thought of being on a spinning ball, kicked into space without any means of communication with any other inhabitants of the universe. But what does the world of many dimensions represent in itself, What are these solids of many dimensions, the lines and boundaries of which we perceive as motion? A great power of imagination is necessary to transcend the limits of our perceptions and to visualize mentally the world in other categories even for a moment. Let us imagine some object, say a book, outside of time and space. What will this last mean? Were we to take the book out of time and space, it would mean that all books which have existed, exist now, and will exist together, i.e., occupy one and the same place and exist simultaneously, forming as it were one book which includes within itself the properties, characteristics and peculiarities of all books possible in the world. When we say simply, a book, we have in mind something possessing the common characteristic of all books. This is a concept. But that book about which we are talking now, possesses not only these common characteristics but the individual characteristics of all separate books. Let us take other things, a table, a house, a tree, a man. Let us imagine them out of time and space. The mind will have to open its doors to objects each possessing such an enormous, such an infinite number of signs and characteristics that to comprehend them by means of the reason is absolutely impossible. And if one wants to comprehend them by his reason, he will certainly be forced to dismember these objects somehow, to take them at first in some one sense, from one side, in one section of their being. What is man out of space and time? He is all humanity, man as the species, Homo sapiens, but at the same time possessing the characteristics, peculiarities and individual earmarks of all separate men. This is you, and I, and Julius Caesar and the conspirators who killed him, and the newsboy I pass every day, all kings, all slaves, all saints, all sinners, all taken together, fused into one indivisible being of a man. Like a great living tree in which are bark, wood, and dry twigs. Green leaves, flowers and fruit. Is it possible to conceive of and understand such a being by our reason? The idea of such a great being inspired the artist or artists who created the Sphinx. But what is motion? Why do we feel it if it does not exist? About this last, Mabel Collins, a theosophical writer of the first period of modern theosophy, writes very beautifully in her poetical story of the year. The entire true meaning of the earthly life consists only in the mutual contact between personalities and in the efforts of growth. Those things which are called events and circumstances and which are regarded as the real contents of life, are in reality only the conditions which make these contacts and this growth possible. In these words there sounds already quite a new understanding of the real. And truly the illusion of motion cannot arise out of nothing. When we are traveling by train, and the trees are running, overtaking one another, we know that this motion is an illusory one, that the trees are immobile, and that the illusion of their motion is created by our own. As in these particular cases, so also in general as regards all motion in the material world, the foundation of which the positivists consider to be motion in the finest particles of matter, we, recognizing this motion as an illusory one, will ask, is not an illusion of this motion created by some motion inside our consciousness? So it will be. And having established this, we shall endeavor to define what kind of motion is going on inside our consciousness, i.e., what is moving relatively to what. H. P. Blavatsky, in her first book, Isis Unveiled, touched upon the same question concerning the relation of life to time and motion. She writes, as our planet revolves every year around the sun and at the same time turns once in every 24 hours upon its own axis, thus traversing minor cycles within a larger one, so is the work of the smaller cyclic periods accomplished and recommenced. The revolution of the physical world, according to the ancient doctrine, is attended by a like revolution in the world of intellect, the spiritual evolution of the world proceeding in cycles, like the physical one. Thus we see in history a regular alternation of ebb and flow in the tide of human progress. The great kingdoms and empires of the world, after reaching the culmination of their greatness, descend again in accordance with the same law by which they ascended. Till, having reached the lowest point, humanity reasserts itself and mounts up once more, the height of its attainment being, by this law of ascending progression by cycles, somewhat higher than the point from which it had before descended. The division of the history of mankind into golden, silver, copper and iron ages, is not a fiction. We see the same thing in the literature of peoples. An age of great inspiration and unconscious productiveness is invariably followed by an age of criticism and consciousness. The one affords material for the analyzing and critical intellect of the other. Thus all those great characters who tower like giants in the history of mankind, like Buddha Siddhartha, and Jesus, in the realm of spiritual, and Alexander the Macedonian and Napoleon the Great, in the realm of physical conquests, were but reflexed images of human types which had existed 10,000 years before, in the preceding decimillennium, reproduced by the mysterious powers controlling the destinies of our world. There is no prominent character in all the annals of sacred or profane history whose prototype we cannot find in the half-fictitious and half-real traditions of bygone religions and mythologies. As the star, glimmering at an immeasurable distance above our heads, in the boundless immensity of the sky, reflects itself in the smooth waters of a lake, so does the imagery of men of the antediluvian ages reflect itself in the periods we can embrace in an historical retrospect. As above, so below. That which has been will return again. As in heaven, so on earth. Anything that can be said about the understanding of temporal relations is inevitably extremely vague. This is because our language is absolutely inadequate to the spatial expression of temporal relations. We lack the necessary words for it, we have no verbal forms, strictly speaking, for the expression of these relations which are new to us, and some other quite new forms, not verbal, are indispensable. The language for the transmission of the new temporal relations must be a language without verbs. New parts of speech are necessary, an infinite number of new words. At present, in our human language we can speak about time by hints only. Its true essence is inexpressible for us. We should never forget about this inexpressibility. This is the sign of the truth, the sign of reality. That which can be expressed, cannot be true. All systems dealing with the relation of the human soul to time, all ideas of post-mortem existence, the theory of reincarnation, that of the transmigration of souls, of karma, are symbols. Trying to transmit relations which cannot be expressed directly because of the poverty and the weakness of our language. They should not be understood literally any more than it is possible to understand the symbols and allegories of art literally. It is necessary to search for their hidden meanings, that which cannot be expressed in words. The literal understanding of these symbolical forms in certain lines of contemporary literature, and the union with them of ideas of evolution and morals taken in the most narrow, dualistic meaning, completely disfigures the inner content of these forms, and deprives them of their value and meaning. Chapter 11. Science and the Problem of the Fourth Dimension. The address of Professor N. A. Umhoff before the Mendeleevskian Convention in 1911, The Characteristic Traits and Problems of Contemporary Scientific Thought. The New Physics. The Electromagnetic Theory. The Principle of Relativity. The Works of Einstein and Minkowski. Simultaneous Existence of the Past and the Future. The Eternal Now. Van Manen's book about occult experiences. The drawing of a four-dimensional figure. Speaking generally with regard to the problems propounded in the foregoing chapters, those of time, space, and the higher dimensions, it is impossible not to dwell once more upon the relation of science to these problems. To many persons the relation of exact science to these questions which undoubtedly constitute the most important problem in now engaging human thought appears highly enigmatical. If it is important, why does not science deal with it? And why, on the contrary, does science repeat the old, contradictory affirmations, pretending not to know or not to notice an entire series of theories and hypotheses advanced? Science should be the investigation of the unknown. Why, therefore, is it not anxious to investigate this unknown, which has been in process of revelation for a long time, which soon will cease to be the unknown? It is possible to answer this question only by acknowledging that unfortunately official, academic science is doing but a small part of what it should be doing in regard to the investigation of the new and unknown. For the most part, it is only teaching that which has already become the commonplace of the independent thinker, or still worse, has already become antiquated and rejected as valueless. So it is the more pleasant to remark that even in science may sometimes be discerned an aspiration toward the search of new horizons of thought. Or, to put it differently, not always, and not in all the academic routine, with its obligatory repetition of an endless number of commonplaces, has the love of knowledge and the power of independent thinking been crowded out. Although timidly and tentatively, science, through its boldest representatives, in the last few decades has after all been touching upon the problems of higher dimensions. And in such cases has arrived at results almost identical with those propounded in the preceding chapters. In December 1911, the Second Mendeleevskian Convention 13 was opened by the address of Professor N.A. Umov, dedicated to the problems of time and higher dimensions under the title, The Characteristic Traits and Problems of Contemporary Natural Scientific Thought. The address of Prof. Umov, though not altogether outspoken, was nevertheless an event of great importance in the history of the development of exact science. And sometime it will doubtless be recognized as an unusually bold and brilliant attempt to come forward and proclaim absolutely new ideas which practically renounce all positivism, and in the very citadel of positivism which the Mendeleevskian Convention represents. But inertia and routine of course did their work. Prof. Umov's address was heard along with the other addresses, was printed in the proceedings of the convention, and arrested. Without producing at all the impression of an exploded bomb that it should have produced had the listeners been more in a position to appreciate its true meaning and significance, and, more important, had they the desire to do so. In this diminution of its significance the reserves and limitations which Prof. Umov himself made in his address assisted to a degree, as did the title, in failing to express its substance and general tendency, which was to show that science goes now in a new direction, and one which is not in reality, i.e., that the new direction goes against science. Professor Umov died in 1916, and I am unwilling to impose upon him thoughts which he did not share. I talked with him in January, 1912, and from our conversation I saw that he was stopping halfway, as it were, between the ideas of the fourth dimension approximating those expressed by me in the first edition of Tertium Organum and those physical theories which still admit motion as an independent fact. What I wish to convey is that Prof. Umov, admitting time as being the fourth dimension of space, did not regard motion as the illusion of our consciousness, but recognized the reality of motion in the world, as a fact independent of us and of our psyche. I speak of this, because later I shall quote extracts from Professor Umov's paper, choosing generally those places containing the ideas almost identical with the thoughts expressed in the preceding chapters. That part of the address which pictures the evolution of modern physics from the atom to the electron I shall omit, because this seems to me somewhat artificially united to those ideas upon which I wish to dwell, and is not inwardly connected with them at all. From my standpoint it is immaterial whether we make the foundation of matter the atom or the electron. I believe that at the foundation of matter lies illusion, or, in other words, a form of perception. And the consistent development of those ideas of higher space which Professor Umov made the basis of his address leads, in my opinion, to the negation of motion. Just as the consistent development of the ideas of mathematical physics has led to the negation of matter as substance. Having mentioned electrons, I may add that there is a method whereby modern scientific ideas and the data of the psychological method may be reconciled. Namely, by the aid of the very ancient systems of the Kabbalah, alchemy and so forth, which establish the foundation of the material world in four principles or elements, of which the first two, fire and water, correspond to the positive and negative electrons of modern physics. But in such case the electrons must be regarded, not simply as electromagnetic units, but as principles, i.e., as two opposite aspects or phases constituting the world. Prof. Umov's address is interesting and remarkable in that he stands already on the very threshold of metaphysics, and he is perhaps hindered from entering only by a lingering faith in the value of the positivistic method, which dies when the new watchwords of science are declared. The introductory word to our forthcoming labors, says Professor Omoff, it will be most proper to dedicate to the excursions of scientific thought in its search for the image of the world. The necessity for scientific research along this path will become clear if we will turn to the covenants of our high priests of science. These covenants convey the deep motives of active service to natural science and to men. It is useful to express them in our time, wherein thought is preeminently directed to the questions of the organization of life. Let us remember the credo of the natural scientist. To establish the authority of man over energy, time and space. To know the architecture of the universe, and in this knowledge to find a basis of creative foresight. This foresight inspires confidence that natural science, continuing the great and responsible work of creation in the fields of nature which it has already made its own, will not fail to enter a new field adapted to the enlarged necessities of mankind. This new nature has become a vital necessity of personal and public activity. But its grandeur and power summon the mind as it were to tranquility. The demand for stability in the household and the brevity of the personal experience in comparison with the evolution of the earth lead men to faith, and create in them an image of the durability of the surrounding order of things, not for the present only, but for the future. The pioneers of natural science do not enjoy such a serene point of view, and to this circumstance the natural sciences are indebted for their continuous development. I venture to lift the brilliant and familiar veil and throw open the sanctuaries of scientific thought, now poised upon the summit of two contrasted contemplations of the world. The steersman of science shall be ceaselessly vigilant, despite the felicity of his voyage, above him shall invariably shine the stars by which he finds his way upon the ocean of the unknown. At the time in which we are living now, the constellations in the skies of our science have changed, and a new star has flashed out, having no equal to itself in brightness. Persistent scientific investigation has expanded the volume of the knowable to dimensions which could scarcely be imagined only a short time, 15 or 20 years, ago. Number remains, as before, the lawmaker of nature, but, being capable of representation, it has escaped from that mode of contemplating the world which regarded as possible its representation by mechanical models. This augmentation of knowledge gives a sufficient number of images for the construction of the world, but they destroy its architecture as that is known to us, and create as it were a new order, extending far, in its free lines, beyond the limits not only of the old visible world, but even beyond the fundamental forms of our thinking. I have now to lead you to the summits from which open the perspectives that are reforming the very basis of our understanding of the world. The ascent to them amid the ruins of classical physics is attended with no small difficulty, and I ask in advance your indulgence and shall exercise all my efforts to simplify and shorten our path as far as possible. Prof. Omoff proceeds to picture the evolution of form, from the atom to the electron, from materialistic and mechanistic ideas about the universe to the electromagnetic theory. The axioms of mechanics are only fragments, and their application may be compared to the judgment concerning the contents of an entire chapter by means of a single sentence. Therefore it is not strange that the attempt of the mechanistic explanation of the properties of the electromagnetic ether by the aid of axioms in which these properties were either denied or one-sidedly predetermined was doomed to failure. The mechanistic contemplation of the world appeared as one-sided. In the image of the world, unity was not in evidence. The electromagnetic world could not remain as something quite alien, unrelated to matter. The material mode of contemplating the world, with its fixed formula, had no sufficient flexibility to bring about unification through it and its principles. There remained only one way out, to sacrifice one of the worlds, the material, the mechanistic, or the electromagnetic. It was necessary to find sufficient foundations for decision on the one side or on the other. These were not slow to appear. The consequent development of physics is a process against matter, which ended with its expulsion. But along with this negative activity has gone the creative work of the reformation of electromagnetic symbolics. It was forced to become adequate to express the properties of the material world, its atomic structure, inertia, radiation and absorption of energy, electromagnetic phenomena. On the horizon of scientific thought was arising the electronic theory of matter. Through electrical corpuscles was opening the connection between matter and vacuum. The idea of a special substratum filling the vacuum, ether, became superfluous. Light and heat are born by the motion of electrons. They are the sons of microcosms. The universe consists of positive and negative corpuscles, bound by electromagnetic fields. Matter disappeared. Its variety was replaced by a system of mutually related electric corpuscles, and instead of the accustomed material world, one deeply different, the electromagnetic world, is envisaging itself to us. But the recognition of the electromagnetic world did not annihilate many unsolved problems and difficulties, and the necessity for a generalizing system was felt. In our difficult ascent we have reached the point, according to Prof. Ulmoff, at which the road divides. One stretches horizontally to that plane which has been pictured, another goes to the high summit which is already visible, and the grade is not steep. Let us look about us at the point which we have reached. It is very dangerous, not one theory only has suffered wreck there. It is the more dangerous that its subtlety is covered by the mask of simplicity. Its basis is the experimental attempts which gave a negative answer to the researches of careful and skilled experimenters. Professor Ulmoff shows the contradictions which were the outcome of certain experiments. The necessity to explain these contradictions served as the incentive to the discovery of the unifying principle. This was the principle of relativity. The deductions of Lorentz, which were made in 1909, and which in general had in view electro-optical phenomena only, gave the impetus to the promulgation by Albert Einstein of a new principle and to its remarkable generalization by the recently deceased Hermann Minkowski. We are approaching the summit of modern physics. It is occupied by the principle of relativity, the expression of which is so simple that it is difficult to discern its all-important significance. It asserts that the laws of phenomena in the system of bodies for the observer who is connected with it, will be the same, whether this system is at rest, or is moving uniformly and rectilinearly. Hence it follows that the observer cannot detect by the aid of the phenomena which are proceeding in the system of bodies with which he is connected, whether this system has a uniform translational motion or not. Thus we cannot detect from any phenomena proceeding on the earth, its translational motion in space. The principle of relativity includes the observing intellect within itself, which is a circumstance of extraordinary significance. The intellect is connected with a complex physical instrument, the nervous system. This principle therefore gives directions concerning things proceeding in moving bodies, not only in relation to physical and chemical phenomena, but also in relation to the phenomena of life and therefore to the quests of man. It is remarkable as an example of a thesis, founded upon strictly scientific experiment, in a purely physical region, which erects a bridge between two worlds usually regarded as quite distinct. Prof. Ulmoff gives examples of the explanation of complex phenomena by the aid of the principle of relativity. He shows further how the most enigmatical problems of life are explained from the standpoint of the electromagnetic theory and the principle of relativity, and he comes at last to that which is the most interesting to us. Time is involved in all spatial measurements. Point 14. We cannot define the geometrical form of a solid moving in relation to us, we are always defining its kinematical form. Therefore our spatial measurements are in reality proceeding not in a three-dimensional manifold, i.e., having three dimensions, of height, length and width, like this hall, but in a four-dimensional manifold. The first three dimensions we can represent by the divisions of a tape measure upon which are marked feet, yards, or some other measure of length. The fourth dimension we will represent by the film of a cinematograph upon which each point corresponds to a new phase of the world's phenomena. The distances between the points of this film are measured by a clock going indifferently with this or that velocity. One observer will measure the distance between 2 points by a year, another by 100 years. The transition from one point to another of this film corresponds to our concept of the flow of time. This fourth dimension we will call, therefore, time. The film of a cinematograph can replace the reel of any tape measure, and contrariwise. The ingenious mathematician, Minkowski, who died too young, proved that all these four dimensions are equivalent. How shall we comprehend this? Persons who arrive in St. Petersburg from Moscow have passed through Tver. They are not at this station, Tver, any longer, but nevertheless it continues to exist. In the same manner, that moment of time corresponding to some event which has already passed, the beginning of life on earth, for example, has not disappeared, it exists still. It is not outlived by the universe, but only by the earth. The place of this event is defined by a certain point in the four-dimensional universe, and this point existed, is existing, and will exist. Now through it, through this station passed by the earth, passes another wanderer. Time does not flow, any more than space flows. It is we who are flowing, wanderers in a four-dimensional universe. Time is just the same measurement of space as is length, breadth and height. Having changed them in the expression of some law of nature, we are returning to the identical law. These new concepts are embodied by Minkowski in an elegant mathematical theory. We shall not enter the magnificent temple erected by his genius, from which proceeds this voice. In nature all is given, for her the past and future do not exist, she is the eternal present, she has no limits either of space or of time. Changes are proceeding in individuals and correspond to their displacements upon worldways in a four-dimensional eternal and limitless manifold. These concepts in the region of philosophical thought will produce a revolution considerably greater than that caused by the displacement of the Earth from the center of the universe by Copernicus. From the times of Newton to those of natural science, more brilliant perspectives have never opened up. Is not the power of natural science proclaimed in the transition from the undoubted experimental fact, the impossibility of the absolute motion of the earth, to a problem of the soul? A contemporary philosopher exclaimed in his confusion, beyond truth and falsehood. When the cult of a new God is born, his word is not perfectly understood, the true meaning only becomes clear after the lapse of time. I think that this is true also as regards the principle of relativity. The elimination of anthropomorphism from scientific conceptions was of enormous service to science. On the same path stands the principle of relativity, showing the dependence of our observations on general conditions of phenomena. The electromagnetic theory of the world, and the principle of relativity, explains only those phenomena the place of which is defined by that part of the universe which is occupied by matter. The rest of it, which presents itself to our senses as a vacuum, remains as yet beyond the reach of science. But at the shores of the material world is changelessly dashing the surf of new energy from that deep ocean, empty for our senses, but not for our reason. Is not this dualism of matter and vacuum the anthropomorphism of science, and the last one? Let us put the fundamental question: what part of the universe is filled by matter? Let us surround our planetary system with a sphere the radius of which is equal to half of the distance from the Sun to the nearest stars. The length of this radius is traversed by a light ray in 1.5 years. The volume of this sphere let us take as the volume of the world. Let us now describe, with the Sun as a center, another, lesser sphere with a radius equal to the distance of our Sun to the outermost planet. I admit that the matter of our world, collected in one place, will not take more than 1/10 of the volume of the planetary sphere. To think that this figure is considerably exaggerated. After calculations of volume, it will appear that in our world the volume occupied by the matter will be related to the volume of the vacuum as the figure 1 to the number represented by the figure 3 with 13 zeros. This relation is equivalent to the relation of 1 second to 1 million years. According to the calculations of Lord Kelvin, the density of matter corresponding to such a relation would be less than the density of water by 10,000 million times, i.e., it would be in an extreme degree of rarefaction. Prof. Omoff gives the example of such a number of balls as correspond to the number of seconds in 1 million years. Upon one of these balls, corresponding to the matter in the universe, is written all that we know, because all that we know is related to matter. And matter is only one ball among millions and millions of balls of vacuum. This is his conclusion. Says he. Matter represents a highly improbable fact in the universe. This event came into existence because small probability does not mean impossibility. But where, and in what manner, are realized more probable events? Is it not in the domain of radiant energy? The theory of probability includes the immense part of the universe, the vacuum, in the world of becoming. We know that radiant energy possesses the preponderating mass. Among the different phenomena in the world of intercrossing rays, out of elements attracting one another are not the tiny fragments born which by their congregation compose our material world. Is not the vacuum the laboratory matter? The material world corresponds to that limited horizon which is open to a man who has come out into a field. To his senses life is teeming only within the limits of this horizon, outside of it for the senses of man there is only a vacuum. I do not desire to start a polemic about those thoughts in Professor Omoff's address with which I do not agree. Yet I shall mention and enumerate the questions which in my opinion are raised by the incompatibility of certain principles. The contrast between the vacuum and the material world sounds almost naive after the just quoted words of Minkowski concerning the necessity of a transfer of attention, on the part of science, from purely physical problems to questions of consciousness. Moreover, I do not see any fundamental difference between the material, the mechanical, and the electromagnetic universe. All this is three-dimensional. In the electromagnetic universe there is as yet no true transition to the fourth dimension. And Professor Omoff makes only one clear attempt to bind the electromagnetic world with the higher dimensions. He says, that sheet of paper, written in electromagnetic symbols, with which we covered the vacuum, it is possible to regard as billions of separate superimposed sheets, but of which each one represents the field of one small electric quantity or charge. But this is all. The rest is just as three-dimensional as the theory of atoms and the ether. We are present at the funeral of the old physics, says Professor Omoff, and this is true. But the old physics is losing itself and disappears not in the electromagnetic theory, but in the idea of a new dimension of space which up to the present has been called time and motion. Truly, the new physics will be that in which there will be no motion, i.e., there will be no dualism of rest and motion, and no dualism of matter and vacuum. Understanding the universe as thought and consciousness, we completely divorce ourselves from the idea of a vacuum. And from this standpoint is explained the small probability of matter to which Professor Omoff referred. Matter, i.e., everything finite, is an illusion in an infinite world. 15. Among many attempts at the psychological investigation of the fourth dimension I shall note one in the book by Johann van Manen, Some Occult Experiences. In this book is a remarkable drawing of a four-dimensional figure which the author saw, by means of his inner vision. This interesting experience Van Manen describes in the following way. When residing and touring in the north of England, several years ago, I talked and lectured several times on the fourth dimension. One day after having retired to bed, I lay fully awake, thinking out some problems connected with this subject. I tried to visualize or think out the shape of a four-dimensional cube, which I imagined to be the simplest four-dimensional shape. To my great astonishment I saw plainly before me first a four-dimensional globe and afterwards a four-dimensional cube, and learned only then from this object lesson that the globe is the simplest body, and not the cube. As the third-dimensional analogy ought to have told me beforehand. The remarkable thing was that the definite endeavor to see the one thing made me see the other. I saw the forms as before me in the air, though the room was dark, and behind the forms I saw clearly a rift in the curtains through which a glimmer of light filtered into the room. This was a case in which I can clearly fix the impression that the objects seen were outside my head. In most of the other cases I could not say so definitely, as they partake of a dual character, being almost equally felt as outside and inside the brain. I forego the attempt to describe the fourth-dimensional cube as to its form. Mathematical description would be possible, but would at the same time disintegrate the real impression in its totality. The fourth-dimensional globe can be better described. It was an ordinary three-dimensional globe, out of which, on each side, beginning at its vertical circumference, bent, tapering horns proceeded, which, with a circular bend, united their points above the globe from which they started. The effect is best indicated by circumscribing the numeral 8 by a circle. So three circles are formed, the lower one representing the initial globe, the upper one representing empty space, and the greater circle circumscribing the whole. If it be now understood that the upper circle does not exist and the lower, small, circle is identical with the outer, large, circle, the impression will have been conveyed, at least to some extent. I have always been easily able to recall this globe. To recall the cube is far more difficult, and I have to concentrate to get it back. I have in a like manner had rare visions of the fifth and sixth dimensional figures. At least I have felt as if the figures I saw were fifth and sixth dimensional. In these matters the greatest caution is necessary. I am aware that I have come into contact with these things as far as the physical brain allows it, without denying that beyond what the brain has caught there was something further, felt at the time, which was not handed on. The sixth dimensional figure I cannot describe. All I remember of it is that it gave me at the time an impression in form of what we might call diversity in unity, or synthesis in differentiation. The fifth dimensional vision is best described, or rather hinted at, by saying that it looked like an alpine relief map, with the singularity that all mountain peaks and the whole landscape represented in the map were one mountain. Or again, in other words, as if all the mountains had one single base. This was the difference between the fifth and the sixth, that in the fifth the excrescences were in one sense exteriorized and yet rooted in the same unit, but in the sixth they were differentiated but not exteriorized. They were only in different ways identical with the same base, which was their whole. C. W. Leadbeater on a note to these remarkable pages says, striking as this drawing is, its value lies chiefly in its suggestiveness to those who have once seen that which it represents. One can hardly hope that it will convey a clear idea of the reality to those who have never seen it. It is difficult to get an animal to understand a picture, apparently because he is incapable of grasping the idea that perspective on a flat surface is intended to represent objects which he knows only as solid. The average man is in exactly the same position with regard to any drawing or model which is intended to suggest to him the idea of the fourth dimension, and so, clever and suggestive as this is, I doubt whether it will be of much help to the average reader. The man who has seen the reality might well be helped by this to bring into his ordinary life a flash of that higher consciousness. And in that case he might perhaps be able to supply, in his thought, what must necessarily be lacking in the physical plane drawing. For my part, I may say that the true meaning of Van Manen's vision is difficult even to appreciate with the means at our disposal. After seeing the drawing in his book I at once felt and understood all that it means, but I disagree somewhat with the author in the interpretation of his drawing. He says, we may also call the total impression that of a ring. I think it was then that I understood for the first time that so-called fourth-dimensional sight is sight with reference to a space conception arising from the visual perception of density. This remark, though very cautious, seems to me dangerous, because it creates the possibility of the same mistake which stopped Hinton in many things and which I partly repeated in the first edition of the book The Fourth Dimension. 16. This mistake consists in the possibility of the construction of some pseudo-fourth dimension, which lies in reality completely in three dimensions. In my opinion there is very much of motion in the figure. The entire figure appears to me as a moving one, continuously generating itself, as though it were at the point of contact of the acute ends, coming from there and involving back there. But I shall not analyze and comment upon Van Manen's experience now, leaving it to readers who have had similar experiences. So far as Van Manen's descriptions of his observations of the fifth and sixth dimensions are concerned, it seems to me that nothing in them warrants the supposition that they are related to any region higher or more complex than the four-dimensional world. In my opinion all these are just observations of the region of the fourth dimension. But the similarity to the experience of certain mystics is very remarkable in them, especially those of Jacob Boehme. Moreover, the method of object lesson is very interesting, i.e., those two images which Van Manen saw and from the comparison of which he deduced his conclusions. Chapter 12. Analysis of Phenomena. What defines different orders of phenomena for us? Methods and forms of the transition of one order of phenomena into another. Phenomena of motion. Phenomena of life, phenomena of consciousness. The central question of our knowledge of the world, what mode of phenomena is generic and produces the others? Can the origin of everything lie in motion? The laws of transformation of energy. Simple transformation and liberation of latent energy. Different liberating forces of different orders of phenomena. The force of mechanical energy, the force of a living cell, the force of an idea. Phenomena and noumena of our world. The order of phenomena is defined for us, first, by the method of apprehending them, and second, by the form of the transition of one order of phenomena into another. According to our method of apprehending them and by the form of their transition into one another we discern three orders of phenomena. Physical phenomena, i.e., all phenomena studied by physics and chemistry. Phenomena of life, all phenomena studied by biology and its subdivisions, psychic phenomena, thoughts, feelings, sensations, etc. We know physical phenomena by means of our sense organs or by the aid of apparatus. Many recognized physical phenomena are not observed directly, they are merely projections of the assumed causes of our sensations, or those of the causes of other phenomena. Physics recognizes the existence of many phenomena which have never been observed by the sense organs or by means of apparatus, the temperature of absolute zero etc., for example. The phenomena of life, as such, are not observed directly. We cannot project them as the cause of definite sensations. But certain groups of sensations force us to assume in certain groups of physical phenomena the presence of the phenomena of life. It may be said that a certain grouping of physical phenomena forces us to assume the presence of the phenomena of life. We define the cause of the phenomena of life as a something not capable of being grasped by the senses or by apparatus, and incommensurable with the causes of physical sensations. A sign of the presence of the phenomena of life consists in the power of organisms to reproduce themselves, i.e., the multiplication of them in the same forms, the indivisibility of separate units and their especial adaptability, which is not observed outside of life. Psychic phenomena are the feelings and the thoughts that we know in ourselves by direct sensation. We assume their existence in others, 1. From analogy with ourselves. 2. From their manifestation in actions and, 3. From that which we gather by the aid of speech. But, as has been shown by certain philosophical theories, it is impossible to establish strictly objectively, the presence of consciousness other than our own. A man establishes this usually because of his inner assurance of its truth. Physical phenomena transform themselves into one another completely. It is possible to transform heat into light, pressure into motion, etc. It is possible to produce any physical phenomenon from other physical phenomena. To produce any chemical combination by the synthetic method, combining the composite parts in proper proportions and under proper physical conditions. Modern physics assumes electromagnetic phenomena as the basis of all physical phenomena. But physical phenomena do not transform themselves into the phenomena of life. By no combination of physical conditions can science create life, just as by chemical synthesis it cannot create living matter, protoplasm. We can tell what amount of coal is necessary to generate the certain amount of heat necessary to transform a given quantity of ice into water. But we cannot tell what amount of coal is necessary to create the vital energy with which one living cell forms another living cell. In similar manner physical, chemical and mechanical phenomena cannot themselves produce the phenomena of consciousness, i.e., of thought. Were it otherwise, a rotating wheel, after the expenditure of a certain amount of energy, or after the lapse of a certain time, could generate an idea. Yet we know perfectly well that the wheel can go on rotating for millions of years, and no single idea will be produced by it at all. Thus we see that the phenomena of motion differ in a fundamental way from the phenomena of life and of consciousness. The phenomena of life change into other phenomena of life, multiply infinitely, and transform themselves into physical phenomena, generating whole series of mechanical and chemical combinations. The phenomena of life manifest themselves to us in physical phenomena, and in the existence of such phenomena. Psychic phenomena are sensed directly, and having enormous potential force, transform themselves into physical phenomena and into manifestations of life. We know that at the basis of our procreative force lies desire, that is, a psychical state, or a phenomenon of consciousness. Desire is possessed of enormous potential force. Out of the united desire of a man and of a woman, a whole nation may come into being. At the root of the active, constructive, creative force of man, that can change the course of rivers, unite oceans, cut through mountains, lies desire, i.e. again a psychical state, or a phenomenon of consciousness. Thus psychic phenomena possess even greater unifying force with relation to physical phenomena than do the phenomena of life. Positive philosophy affirms that all three orders of phenomena proceed from one cause lying within the sphere of the study of physics. This cause is called by different names at different times, but it is assumed to be identical with physical energy in general. Seriously analyzing such an affirmation, it is easily seen to be absolutely arbitrary, and not founded upon anything. Physical phenomena of themselves, inside the limits of our existence and observation, never create the phenomena of life and the phenomena of consciousness. Consequently, we may with greater right assume that in the phenomena of life and in the phenomena of consciousness there is something which does not exist in physical phenomena. Moreover, we cannot measure physical, biological, and psychic phenomena by the same unit of measurement. Or more correctly, we cannot measure the phenomena of life and the phenomena of consciousness at all. It is only the phenomena first mentioned, i.e., the physical, that we fancy we can measure, though this is very doubtful, too. In any case, we undoubtedly know that we can express neither the phenomena of life nor psychic phenomena in the formula of physical phenomena, and generally speaking we have for them no formulae at all. In order to clarify the relation between phenomena of different kinds, let us examine in detail the laws of their transformation one into another. First of all, it is necessary to consider physical phenomena, and make a detailed study of the conditions and properties of their transformation one into another. In an essay on Wundt, the Northern Messenger, 1888, A. L. Volinsky, elucidating the principles of Wundt's physiological psychology, says, "The actions of sensation are provoked by the actions of irritation. But both these actions need not be at all equal. It is possible to burn a whole city by a spark from a cigarette. It is necessary to understand why this is possible. Place a board upon the edge of some object scalewise, so that it will balance. On both ends of the board put now an equal amount of weight. The weights will not fall, although both of them will tend to fall, they balance one another. If we lift the least weight from one end of the board, then the other end will overbalance, and the board will fall, i.e., the force of gravity which existed before as an invisible tendency, will have become a visible motive force. If we put the board and weights on the earth, the force of gravity will not produce any action, but it will not be eliminated, it will only transform itself into other forces. Those forces which are only striving to produce motion are called constrained, or dead, forces. The forces which are actually manifesting themselves in certain definite actions are called free, or live forces. But as regards free forces, it is necessary to differentiate those forces which are liberating, setting free, from the forces which are liberated, or set free. An enormous difference exists between the liberation of a force and its transformation into another. When one kind of motion transforms itself into another kind, the amount of free force remains the same. And contrariwise, when one force liberates another, the amount of free force changes. The free force of an irritation liberates the tied-up forces of a nerve. And this liberation of tied-up forces is proceeding at each point of the nerve. The first motion increases like a fire, like a snowslide carrying along with it new and ever new drifts. It is for this reason that the action, phenomenon, of sensation need not be exactly equal to the action of irritation. Let us look more broadly at the relation between liberated and liberating forces in the different kinds of phenomena. We shall discover that sometimes an almost negligible amount of physical force may liberate an enormous, a colossal amount of physical energy. But all that we can ever assemble of physical force is powerless to liberate a single iota of that vital energy necessary for the independent existence of a single microscopic living organism. The force contained in living organisms, the vital force, is capable of liberating infinitely greater amounts of vital and also of physical energy than the force of motion. The microscopic living cell is capable of infinite dissemination, to evolve new species, to cover continents with vegetation, to fill the oceans with seaweed, to build islands out of coral, to deposit powerful layers of coal, etc., etc. Concerning the latent energy contained in the phenomena of consciousness, i.e., in thoughts, feelings, desires, we discover that its potentiality is even more immeasurable, more boundless. From personal experience, from observation, from history, we know that ideas, feelings, desires, manifesting themselves, can liberate enormous quantities of energy, and create infinite series of phenomena. An idea can act for centuries and millenniums and only grow and deepen, evoking ever new series of phenomena, liberating ever fresh energy. We know that thoughts continue to live and act when even the very name of the man who created them has been converted into a myth, like the names of the founders of ancient religions, the creators of the immortal poetical works of antiquity, heroes, leaders, prophets. Their words are repeated by innumerable lips, their ideas are studied and commented upon. Their preserved works are translated, printed, read, studied, staged, illustrated. And this is done not only with the masterpieces of men of genius, but some single little verse may live millenniums, making hundreds of men work for it, serve it, in order to transmit it further. Observe how much of potential energy there is in some little verse of Pushkin or Lermontov. This energy acts not only upon the feelings of men, but by reason of its very existence it acts upon their will. See how vital and immortal are the words, thoughts and feelings of half-mythical Homer, how much of motion each word of his, during the time of its existence, has evoked. Undoubtedly each thought of a poet contains enormous potential force, like the power confined in a piece of coal or in a living cell, but infinitely more subtle, imponderable and potent. This remarkable correlation of phenomena may be expressed in the following terms: the farther a given phenomenon is from the visible and sensed, from the physical, the farther it is from matter, the more there is in it of hidden force. The greater the quantity of phenomena it can produce, can leave in its wake, the greater amount of energy it can liberate, and so the less it is dependent upon time. Underscore. If we would correlate all of the above with the principle of physics that the amount of energy is constant, then we must state more exactly that in the preceding discussion nothing has been said of the creation of new energy, but of the liberation of latent force. And we have found that the liberating force of life and thought is infinitely greater than the liberating force of mechanical motion and of chemical reactions. The microscopic living cell is more powerful than a volcano, the idea is more powerful than the geological cataclysm. Having established these differences between phenomena, let us endeavor to discover what phenomena themselves represent, taken by themselves, independently of our receptivity in sensation of them. We at once discover that we know nothing about them. We know a phenomenon just as much and just as far as it is irritation, i.e., to the extent that it provokes sensation. The positivistic philosophy sees mechanical motion or electromagnetic energy as the basis of all phenomena. But the hypothesis of vibrating atoms or of units of energy, electrons and cycles of motion, combinations of which create different phenomena, is only an hypothesis, built upon a perfectly arbitrary and artificial assumption concerning the existence of the world in time and space. Just as soon as we discover that the conditions of time and space are merely the properties of our sensuous receptivity, we absolutely destroy the validity of the hypothesis of energy, as the foundation of everything. Because time and space are necessary for energy, i.e., it is necessary for time and space to be properties of the world and not properties of consciousness. Thus in reality we know nothing about the causes of phenomena. We do know that some combinations of causes, acting through the organism upon our consciousness, produce the series of sensations which we recognize as a green tree. But we do not know if this perception of a tree corresponds to the real substance of the causes which evoked this sensation. The question concerning the relation of the phenomenon to the thing in itself, i.e., to the indwelling reality, has been from far back the chief and most difficult concern of philosophy. Can we, studying phenomena, get at the very cause of them, at the very substance of things? Kant has said definitely, no. By studying phenomena we do not even approach to the understanding of things in themselves. Recognizing the correctness of Kant's view, if we desire to approach to an understanding of things in themselves, we must seek an entirely different method, an utterly different path from that which positive science, which studies phenomena, is treading. Chapter 13. The Apparent and the Hidden Side of Life. Positivism as the study of the phenomenal side of life. Of what does the two-dimensionality of positive philosophy consist? The regarding of everything upon a single plane, in one physical sequence. The streams which flow underneath the earth. What can the study of life, as a phenomenon, yield? The artificial world which science erects for itself. The unreality of finished and isolated phenomena. The new apprehension of the world. There exist visible and hidden causes of phenomena, there exist also visible and hidden effects. Let us consider one example. In all textbooks on the history of literature we are told that in its time Goethe's Werther provoked an epidemic of suicides. What did provoke these suicides? Let us imagine that some scientist appears, who, being interested in the fact of the increase of suicides, begins to study the first edition of Werther according to the method of exact, positive science. He weighs the book, measures it by the most precise instruments, notes the number of its pages, makes a chemical analysis of the paper and the ink, counts the number of lines on every page, the number of letters. And even how many times the letter A is repeated, how many times the letter B, and how many times the interrogation mark is used, and so on. In other words, he does everything that the pious Mohammedan performs with relation to the Quran of Muhammad, and on the basis of his investigations writes a treatise on the relation of the letter A of the German alphabet to suicide. Or let us imagine another scientist who studies the history of painting, and deciding to put it on a scientific basis, starts a lengthy series of analyses of the pigment used in the pictures of famous painters in order to discover the causes of the different impressions produced upon the beholder by different pictures. Imagine a savage studying a watch. Let us admit that he is a wise and crafty savage. He takes the watch apart and counts all its wheels and screws, counts the number of teeth in each gear, finds out its size and thickness. The only thing that he does not know is what all these things are for. He does not know that the hand completes the circuit of the dial in half of 24 hours, i.e., that it is possible to tell time by means of a watch. All this is positivism. We are too familiar with positivistic methods, and so fail to realize that they end in absurdities and that if we are seeking to explain the meaning of anything, they do not lead to the goal at all. The difficulty is that for the explanation of the meaning positivism is of no use. For nature is a closed book of which it studies the appearance only. In the matter of the study of the operations of nature, the positive methods have achieved much, as is proven by the innumerable successes of modern techniques, including the conquest of the air. But everything in the world has its own definite sphere of action. Positivism is very good when it seeks an answer to the question of how something operates under given conditions. But when it makes the attempt to get outside of its definite conditions, space, time, causation, or presumes to affirm that nothing exists outside of these given conditions, then it is transcending its own proper sphere. It is true that the more serious positive thinkers deny the possibility of including in positive investigation the question of why and what for. But as a matter of fact, the positive standpoint is not the only possible one. The usual mistake of positivism consists in its not seeing anything except itself. It either considers everything as possible to it, or considers as generally impossible much that is entirely possible, but not for positive inquiry. Humanity will never cease to search, however, for answer to the questions why, and wherefore. The positivistic scientist finds himself in the presence of nature almost in the position of a savage in a library of rare and valuable books. For a savage a book is a thing of definite size and weight. However long he may ask himself what purpose this strange thing serves, he will never discover the truth from its appearance. And the contents of the book will remain for him the incomprehensible noumenon. In like manner the contents of nature are incomprehensible to the positivistic scientist. But if a man knows of the existence of the contents of the book, the noumenon of life, if he knows that a mysterious meaning is hidden under visible phenomena, there is the possibility that in the long run he will discover the contents. For success in this it is necessary to grasp the idea of the inner contents, i.e., the meaning of the thing in itself. The scientist who discovers little tablets with hieroglyphics, or wedge-shaped inscriptions in an unknown language, deciphers and reads them after great labor. And in order to accomplish this he needs only one thing: it is necessary for him to know that these little signs represent an inscription. As long as he regards them simply as an ornament, as the outside embellishment of little tablets, or as an accidental tracing without meaning, up to that time their meaning and significance will be closed to him absolutely. But let him only assume the existence of that meaning and the possibility of its comprehension will be already within sight. No secret cipher exists which cannot be solved without the aid of any key. But it is necessary to know that it is a cipher. This is the first and necessary condition. Lacking this it is impossible to accomplish anything. ____________. The idea of the existence of the visible and the hidden sides of life was known to philosophy long ago. Phenomena were regarded as only one aspect of the world, and as being infinitely small compared to the hidden aspect, seeming, not existing really, arising in consciousness at the moment of its contact with the real world. Another side, noumena, was recognized as really existing in itself, but inaccessible for our receptivity. But there is no greater error than to regard the world as divided into phenomena and noumena, to conceive of phenomena and noumena apart from one another, and susceptible of being separately known. This is philosophic illiteracy, which shows itself most clearly in the dualistic spiritistic theories. The division into phenomena and noumena exists only in our minds. The phenomenal world is simply our incorrect perception of the world. As Karl Duprel has said, the world beyond is this world, only perceived strangely. It would be more accurate to say, that this world is the world beyond perceived strangely. Kant's idea is quite correct, that the study of the phenomenal side of the world will not bring us any nearer to the understanding of things in themselves. The thing in itself, that is the thing as it exists in itself, independently of us. The phenomenon of the thing, that is the thing in such semblance as we perceive it. The example of a book in the hands of an illiterate savage shows us quite clearly that it is sufficient not to know about the existence of the noumenon of a thing, the contents of the book in this case, in order that it shall not manifest itself in phenomena. On the other hand, the knowledge of its existence is sufficient to make possible its discovery with the aid of the very phenomena which, without the knowledge of the noumenon, would be perfectly useless. Just as it is impossible for a savage to attain to an understanding of the nature of a watch by a study of its phenomenal side, the number of wheels, and the number of teeth in each gear, so also for the positivistic scientist, studying the external manifesting side of life, its secret raison d'être and the aim of separate manifestations will be forever hidden. To the savage the watch will be an extremely interesting, complicated, but entirely useless toy. Somewhat after this manner a man appears to the scientist materialist, a mechanism infinitely more complex, but equally unknown as regards the purpose for which it exists and the manner of its creation. We pictured to ourselves how incomprehensible the functions of a candle and of a coin would be for a plain man, studying two similar circles on his plane. In like manner the functions of a man are incomprehensible to the scientist, studying him as a mechanism. The reason for this is clear. It is because the coin and the candle are not two similar circles, but two different objects, having an entirely different use and meaning in that world which is relatively higher than the plane, and man is not a mechanism, but something having an aim and meaning in the world relatively higher than the visible one. The functions of a candle and of a coin in our world are for the imaginary plane man an inaccessible noumenon. It is evident that the phenomenon of a circle cannot give any understanding of the function of a candle, and its difference from the function of a coin. But two-dimensional knowledge exists not alone on the plane. Materialistic thought tries to apply it to real life. A curious result follows, the true meaning of which is, unhappily, incomprehensible to many people. One of such applications is, the economic man. This is quite clearly the two-dimensional and flat being moving in two directions, those of production and consumption, i.e., living upon the plane of production-consumption. How is it possible to imagine man in general as such an obviously artificial being? And how is it possible to hope to understand the laws of the life of man, with his complex spiritual aspirations and his great impulse to know? To understand everything around about him and within himself, by studying the imaginary laws of the imaginary being upon an imaginary plane? The inventors of this theory alone possess the secret of the answer to this question. But the economic theory of human life attracts men as do all simple theories giving a short answer to a series of complicated questions. And we are ourselves too entangled in materialistic theories to see anything beyond them. Positivistic science does not really deny the theory of phenomena and noumena, it only affirms, in opposition to Kant, that in studying phenomena we are gradually approaching to noumena. The noumena of phenomena science considers to be the motion of atoms and the ether, or the vibrations of electrons. It conceives of the universe as a whirl of mechanical motion or the field of manifestation of electromagnetic energy taking on the phenomenal tint for us on their reception by the organs of sense. Positivism affirms that the phenomena of life and psychic phenomena are simply the functions of physical phenomena, that without physical phenomena the phenomena of life, thought and emotion cannot exist and that they represent only certain complex combinations of the foregoing. And furthermore that all these three kinds of phenomena are one and the same thing in substance, and the higher, i.e., the phenomena of life and of consciousness, are only different expressions of the lower, i.e., of one and the same physico-mechanical or electromagnetic energy. But to all this it is possible to answer one thing. If it were true it would have been proven long ago. Nothing is easier than to prove the energetic hypothesis of life and the psyche. Just create life and thought by the mechanical method. Materialism and energetics are those obvious theories which cannot be true without proofs, because they cannot not have proofs if they contain even a little grain of truth. But there are no proofs at the disposition of these theories. Quite the reverse, the infinitely greater potentiality of the phenomena of life and the psyche compared with physical phenomena assures us of the exact opposite. The simple fact, above shown, of the enormous liberating, unbinding force of psychic phenomena is sufficient to establish quite really and firmly the problem of the world of the hidden. And the world of the hidden cannot be the world of unconscious mechanical motion, of unconscious development of electromagnetic forces. The positivistic theory admits the possibility of explaining the higher through the lower, the invisible through the visible. But it has been shown at the very beginning that this is the explanation of one unknown by another unknown. There is still less justification for explaining the known through the unknown. Yet that lower, matter and motion, through which the positivists strive to explain the higher, life and thought, is itself unknown. Consequently it is impossible to explain and define anything else in terms of it, while the higher, i.e., the thought, this is our sole known, it is this alone that we do know, that we are conscious of in ourselves, that we can neither mistake nor doubt. And if thought can evoke or unbind physical energy, and motion can never create or unbind thought, out of a revolving will no thought ever arose, so of course we shall strive to define, not the higher in terms of the lower, but the lower in terms of the higher. If the invisible, like the contents of a book or the purpose of a watch, defines by itself the visible, so also we shall endeavor to understand not the visible, but the invisible. Starting from a false assumption concerning the mechanicality of the noumenal side of nature, positive science, upon which the view of the world of the intelligent majority of contemporary humanity is founded, makes still another mistake in regard to cause and effect, or the law of functions, that is, it mistakes what is cause, and what is effect. Just as the two-dimensional plane man thinks of all phenomena touching his consciousness as lying on one plane, so the positivistic method strives to interpret upon one plane all phenomena of different orders, i.e., To interpret all visible phenomena as the effects of antecedent visible phenomena, and as the inevitable cause of subsequent visible phenomena. In other words, it sees in causal and functional interdependence merely phenomena proceeding upon the surface, and studies the visible world, or the phenomena of the visible world. Not admitting that causes can enter into this world which are not contained in it, or that the phenomena of this world can possess functions extending beyond it. But this could be true only in case there were no phenomena of life and of thought in the world, or if the phenomena of life and thought were really derivatives from physical phenomena, and did not possess infinitely greater latent force than they. Then only should we have the right to consider the chains of phenomena in their physical or visible sequence alone, as positivistic philosophy does. But taking into consideration the phenomena of life and thought, we shall inevitably recognize that the chain of phenomena often translates itself from a sequence purely physical to a biological sequence, i.e., one in which there is much of the hidden and invisible to us, or to a psychical sequence where there is even more of the hidden. But during reverse translations from biological and psychical spheres into physical sequences, actions proceed often, if not always, from regions which are hidden from us, i.e., the cause of the visible is the invisible. In consequence of this, we must admit that it is impossible to consider the chains of sequences in the world of physical phenomena only. When such a sequence touches the life of a man or that of a human society, we perceive clearly that it escapes from the physical sphere and returns into it. Regarding the matter from this standpoint, we see that, just as in the life of one man and in the life of a society there are many streams, at times appearing on the surface and spouting up in boisterous torrents, and at other times disappearing deep underground, hidden from view, but only waiting for their moment to appear again on the surface. So do we observe in the world continuous chains of phenomena, and we perceive how these chains shift from one order of phenomena to another without a break. We observe how the phenomena of consciousness, thoughts, feelings, desires, are accompanied by physiological phenomena, creating them perhaps, and inaugurate a series of purely physical phenomena. And we see how physical phenomena, becoming the object of sensations of sight, hearing, touch, smell and the like, induce physiological phenomena, and then psychological. But looking at life from that side, we see only physical phenomena, and having assured ourselves that it is the only reality, we may not notice the others at all. Herein appears the enormous power of suggestion in current ideas. To a sincere positivist, any metaphysical argument proving the unreality of matter or energy seems sophistry. It strikes him as a thing unnecessary, disagreeable, hindering a logical train of thought, an assault without aim or meaning on that which in his opinion is firmly established, alone immutable, lying at the foundation of everything. He vexedly fans away from himself all idealistic or mystical theories as he would a buzzing mosquito. But the fact is that thought and energy are different in substance and cannot be one and the same thing, because they are different sides of one and the same thing. For if we open the cranium of a living man in order to observe all the vibrations of the cells of the gray matter of the brain, and all the quivering white fibers, in spite of everything there will be merely motion, i.e., the manifestation of energy, and thought will remain somewhere beyond the limits of investigation, retreating like a shadow at every approach. The positivist, when he begins to realize this, feels that the ground is quaking underneath his feet, feels that by his method he will never approach to the thought. Then he sees clearly the necessity for a new method. As soon as he begins to think about it, he begins quite unexpectedly to notice things around him which he did not see before. His eyes begin to open to that which he did not wish to see before. The walls which he had erected around himself begin to fall one after another, and behind the falling walls infinite horizons of possible knowledge, hitherto undreamed of, unroll before him. Thereupon he completely alters his view of everything surrounding him. He understands that the visible is produced by the invisible, and that without understanding the invisible it is impossible to understand the visible. His positivism begins to totter, and, if he is a man with a bold thought, then in some splendid moment he will perceive those things which he was wont to regard as real and true to be unreal and false. And those things regarded as false to be real and true. First of all he will see that manifested physical phenomena often hide themselves, like a stream that has gone underground. Yet they do not disappear altogether, but continue to exist in latent form in some minds, in someone's memory, in the words or books of someone, just as the future harvest is latent in the seeds. And thereafter they again burst into light. Out of this latent state they come into an apparent one, making a roar, reverberation, motion. We observe such transitions of the invisible into the visible in the personal life of man, in the life of peoples, and in the history of humanity. These chains of events go on continuously, interweaving among themselves, entering one into another, sometimes hidden from our eyes, and sometimes visible. I find an admirable description of this idea in the chapter on Karma, in Light on the Path by Mabel Collins. 17. Consider with me that the individual existence is a rope which stretches from the infinite to the infinite, and has no end and no commencement, neither is it capable of being broken. This rope is formed of innumerable fine threads, which, lying closely together, form its thickness. And remember that the threads are living, are like electric wires, more, are like quivering nerves. But eventually the long strands, the living threads which in their unbroken continuity form the individual, pass out of the shadow into the shine. This illustration presents but a small portion, a single side of the truth, it is less than a fragment. Yet dwell on it, by its aid you may be led to perceive more. What it is necessary first to understand is not that the future is formed by any separate acts of the present, but that the whole of the future is in unbroken continuity with the present, as the present is with the past. In the plain, from one point of view, the illustration of the rope is correct. The passages quoted show us that the idea of karma, developed in remote antiquity by Hindu philosophy, embodies the idea of the unbroken consecutiveness of phenomena. Each phenomenon, no matter how insignificant, is a link of an infinite and unbroken chain, extending from the past into the future, passing from one sphere into another, sometimes manifesting as physical phenomena, sometimes hiding in the phenomena of consciousness. If we regard karma from the standpoint of our theory of time and space of many dimensions, then the connection between distant events will cease to be wonderful and incomprehensible. If events most distant from one another in relation to time touch one another in the fourth dimension, this means that they are proceeding simultaneously as cause and effect. And the walls dividing them are just an illusion which our weak intellect cannot conquer. Things are united, not by time, but by an inner connection, an inner correlation. And time cannot separate those things which are inwardly near, following one from another. Certain other properties of these things force us to think of them as being separated by the ocean of time. But we know that this ocean does not exist in reality, and we begin to understand how and why the events of one millennium can directly influence the events of another millennium. The hidden activity of events becomes comprehensible to us. We understand that the events must become hidden in order to preserve for us the illusion of time. We know this, know that the events of today were the ideas and feelings of yesterday, and that the events of tomorrow are lying in someone's irritation, in someone's hunger, in someone's suffering, and possibly still more in someone's imagination. In someone's fantasy, in someone's dreams. We know all this, yet nevertheless our positive science obstinately seeks to establish correlations between visible phenomena only, i.e., to regard each visible or physical phenomenon as the effect of some other physical phenomenon only, which is also visible. This tendency to regard everything upon one plane, the unwillingness to recognize anything outside of that plane, horribly narrows our view of life. Prevents our grasping it in its entirety, and taken in conjunction with the materialistic attempts to account for the higher as a function of the lower, appears as the principal impediment to the development of our knowledge. The chief cause of the dissatisfaction with science, the complaints about the bankruptcy of science, and its actual bankruptcy in many of its relations. The dissatisfaction with science is perfectly well grounded, and the complaints about its insolvency are entirely just, because science has really entered a cul-de-sac out of which there is no escape. And the official recognition of the fact that the direction it has taken is entirely the wrong one, is only a question of time. __________. We may say, not as an assumption, but as an affirmation, that the world of physical phenomena in itself represents the section, as it were, of another world, existing right here, and the events of which are proceeding right here. But invisibly to us. There is nothing more miraculous or supernatural than life. Consider the street of a great city, in all its details. An enormous diversity of facts will result. But how much is hidden underneath these facts of that which it is impossible to see at all? What desires, passions, thoughts, greed, covetousness, how much of suffering both petty and great, how much of deceit, falsity, how much of lying? How many invisible thread sympathies, antipathies, interests, bind this street with the entire world, with all the past and with all the future? If we realize this imaginatively, then it will become clear that it is impossible to study the street by that which is visible alone. It is necessary to plunge into the depths. The complex and enormous phenomena of the street will not reveal its infinite noumenon, which is bound up both with eternity and with time, with the past and with the future, and with the entire world. Therefore we have a full right to regard the visible phenomenal world as a section of some other infinitely more complex world, manifesting itself at a given moment in the first one. And this world of noumena is infinite and incomprehensible for us, just as the three-dimensional world, in all its manifoldness of function, is incomprehensible to the two-dimensional being. The nearest approach to truth, which is possible for a man, is contained in the saying, "Everything has an infinite variety of meanings, and to know them all is impossible." In other words, truth, as we understand it, i.e., the finite definition, is possible only in a finite series of phenomena. In an infinite series it will certainly become its own opposite. Hegel has given utterance to this last thought: every idea, extended into infinity, becomes its own opposite. In this change of meaning is contained the cause of the incomprehensibility to man of the noumenal world. The substance of a thing, i.e., the thing in itself, contains an infinite quantity of meanings and functions of something which it is impossible to grasp with our mind. And in addition to this it involves a change of meaning of one and the same thing. In one meaning it represents an enormous whole, including within itself a great number of things, in another meaning it is an insignificant part of a great whole. Our mind cannot bind all this into one. Therefore, the substance of a thing recedes from us according to the measure of our knowledge, just as a shadow flees before us. Light on the path says, "You will enter the light, but you will never touch the flame." This means that all knowledge is relative. We can never grasp all the meanings of any one thing, because in order to grasp them all, it is necessary for us to grasp the whole world, with all the variety of meanings contained in it. The principal difference between the phenomenal and noumenal aspects of the world is contained in the fact that the first one is always limited, always finite. It includes those properties of a given thing which we can generally know as phenomena. The second, or noumenal aspect, is always unlimited, always infinite. And we can never say where the hidden functions and the hidden meanings of a given thing end. Properly speaking, they end nowhere. They may vary infinitely, i.e., may seem various, ever new from some new standpoint, but they cannot utterly vanish, any more than they can cease, come to an end. All that is highest to which we shall come in the understanding of the meaning, the significance, of the soul of any phenomenon, will again have another meaning, from another, still higher standpoint. In still broader generalization, and there is no end to it. In this is the majesty and the horror of infinity. Underscore. Let us also remember that the world as we know it does not represent anything stable. It must change with the slightest change in the foams of our knowledge. Phenomena which appear to us as unrelated can be seen by some other more inclusive consciousness as parts of a single whole. Phenomena which appear to us as similar may reveal themselves as entirely different. Phenomena which appear to us as complete and indivisible, may be in reality exceedingly complex, may include within themselves different elements, having nothing in common. And all these together may be one whole in a category quite incomprehensible to us. Therefore, beyond our view of things another view is possible, a view, as it were, from another world, from over there, from the other side. Now, over there, does not mean some other place, but a new method of knowledge, a new understanding. And should we regard phenomena not as isolated, but bound together with intercrossing chains of things and events, we would begin to regard them not from over here, but from over there. Chapter 14. The Voices of Stones. The wall of a church and the wall of a prison. The mast of a ship and a gallows. The shadow of a hangman and of an ascetic. The soul of a hangman and of an ascetic. The different combinations of known phenomena in higher space. The relationship of phenomena which appear unrelated, and the difference between phenomena which appear similar. How shall we approach the noumenal world? The understanding of things outside the categories of space and time. The reality of many figures of speech. The occult understanding of energy. The letter of a Hindu occultist. Art as the knowledge of the noumenal world. What we see and what we do not see. Plato's dialogue about the cavern. It seems to us that we see something and understand something. But in reality all that proceeds around us we sense only very confusedly, just as a snail senses confusedly the sunlight, the darkness, and the rain. Sometimes in things we sense confusedly their difference in function, i.e., their real difference. On one occasion I was crossing the Neva with one of my friends, A., with whom I happened to have had many conversations upon the themes touched on in this book. We had been talking, but both fell silent as we approached the fortress, gazing up at its walls and making probably the same reflection. Right, there are also factory chimneys, said A. Behind the walls of the fortress indeed appeared some brick chimneys blackened by smoke. On his saying this, I too sensed the difference between the chimneys and the prison walls with unusual clearness and like an electric shock. I realized the difference between the very bricks themselves, and it seemed to me that I realized this difference also. Later in conversation with A., I recalled this episode, and he told me that not only then, but always, he sensed these differences and was deeply convinced of their reality. Positivism assures itself that a stone is a stone and nothing more, he said, but any simple woman or child knows perfectly that a stone from the wall of a church and one from a prison wall are different things. It seems to me also, that in considering a given phenomenon in connection with all the chains of sequences of which it is a link, we shall see that the subjective sensation of the difference between two physically similar objects, which we are accustomed to think of only as poetic expression, metaphor, and the reality of which we deny, is entirely real. We shall see that these objects are really different, just as different as the candle and the coin which appear as similar circles, moving lines, in the two-dimensional world of the plain man. We shall see that things of the same material constitution but different in their functions are really different, and that this difference goes so deep as to make different the very material which is physically the same. There are differences in stone, in wood, in iron, in paper, which no chemistry will ever detect, but these differences exist, and there are men who feel and understand them. The mast of a ship, a gallows, a crucifix at a crossroads on the steps, these may be made of the same kind of wood, but in reality they are different objects made of different material. That which we see, touch, investigate, is nothing more than the circles on the plane made by the coin and the candle. They are only the shadows of real things, the substance of which is contained in their function. The shadow of a sailor, of a hangman, and of an ascetic may be quite similar. It is impossible to distinguish them by their shadows, just as it is impossible to find any difference between the wood of a mast, of a gallows and of a cross by chemical analysis. But they are different men and different objects, their shadows only are equal and similar. And if we take men as we know them, the sailor, the hangman, the ascetic, men who seem to us similar and equal, and consider them from the standpoint of their differences in function, we shall see that in reality they are entirely different and that there is nothing in common between them. They are quite different beings, belonging to different categories, to different planes of the world between which there are no bridges, no avenues at all. These men seem to us equal and similar because in most cases we see only the shadows of real facts. The souls of these men are actually quite different not only in their quality, their magnitude, their age, as some people like now to put it, but as different in the very nature. Origin and purpose of their existence as things belonging to entirely different categories can be. When we shall begin to understand this, the general concept man will take on a different meaning. And this relation holds in the observation of all phenomena. The mast, the gallows, the cross, these are things belonging to such different categories, the atoms of such different objects, known only by their functions, that there cannot be a question of any similarity at all. Our misfortune consists in the fact that we regard the chemical constitution of a thing as its most real attribute, while as a matter of fact its true attributes must be sought for in its functions. Could we broaden and deepen our vision of the chains of causation, the links of which are forged by our action and our conduct? Could we learn to see them not only in their narrow relation to the life of man, to our personal life, but in their broad cosmical meaning? Could we succeed in finding and establishing a connection between the simple phenomena of our life and the life of the cosmos, then without doubt in these simplest phenomena would be unveiled for us an infinity of the new and the unexpected. For example, in this way we may come to know something entirely new about those simple physical phenomena which we are accustomed to regard as natural and obvious and about which we think we know something. Then, unexpectedly, we may find that we know nothing, that everything heretofore known about them is only an incorrect deduction from incorrect premises. There may be revealed to us something infinitely great and immeasurably important in such phenomena as the expansion and contraction of solids, electrical phenomena, heat, light, sound, the movements of the planets, the coming of day and of night, the change of seasons, a thunderstorm, heat lightning, etc. etc. Generally speaking, we may find explained in the most unexpected manner the properties of phenomena which we used to accept as given things, as not containing anything within themselves that we could not see and understand. The constancy, the time, the periodicity or unperiodicity of phenomena may take on quite a new meaning and significance for us. The new and the unexpected may reveal itself in the transition of some phenomena into others. Birth, death, the life of a man, his relations with other men, love, enmity, sympathies, antipathies, desires, passions, these may unexpectedly receive illumination by an entirely new light. It is impossible now to imagine the nature of this newness which we shall sense in familiar things, and once felt it will be difficult to understand. But it is really only our inaptitude to feel and understand this newness which divides us from it, because we are living in it and amidst it. Our senses, however, are too primitive, our concepts are too crude, for that fine differentiation of phenomena which must